Clara Ashford pressed the crumpled letter against her chest so hard the paper bit into her palm. Standing in the dust of Sagebrush Hollow with nothing but a single trunk and a name she'd agreed to carry for the rest of her life. The man in front of her wasn't what she'd imagined. He wasn't even close. Tall and silent as a fence post, weathered jaw set like carved stone, eyes that looked straight through her. And on either side of him, two small children staring up at her like she was something they'd never seen before and weren't sure they wanted to see. If you've ever left everything behind, searching for something real, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The stagecoach had smelled of leather and sweat and old tobacco, and Clara Ashford had spent the last 3 days convincing herself that was perfectly fine, that everything was going to be perfectly fine. She had the letter memorized by now. She'd read it so many times the ink had faded at the creases. A man of good standing, a working ranch, a quiet life with purpose. Those were the words the agency had used. She'd carried those words like a lantern through every mile of desert and dust, telling herself that whatever waited at the end of this road had to be better than what she'd left behind. She was wrong. Not immediately, not in the first second. In the first second, all she could register was the heat. The raw, breathless, merciless heat of the Texas summer pressing down on Sagebrush Hollow like a hand flattening paper. Clara stepped off the coach, and her boot heels sank into the soft earth of the road. She looked up, and there he was, Silas Drifter. He was taller than she expected, broader through the shoulders. His hat was dark brown and dusty, his jaw lined with the kind of stubble that suggested shaving was something he got to when he got to it. And his eyes, she noticed his eyes first, before anything else, were a pale, careful gray that looked like winter sky. Not unkind, but not warm, not anything close to warm. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even trying to smile. He pulled his hat off his head, held it at his side, gave her a single nod. "Miss Ashford?" "Mr. Drifter." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She was proud of that. A beat of silence opened between them that felt about 3 miles wide. Clara became acutely aware of how she must look. Her traveling dress rumpled and damp. Her hair half escaped from its pins. Her white gloves already gray at the fingertips from the coach's windowsill. She had dressed carefully that morning. She had tried. She could see from the flat line of his mouth that he had noticed neither the effort nor its failure. "You're smaller than I pictured," he said. "Not unkind, just a fact." "You're quieter than I expected," she said back. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not quite, but the corner of his mouth moved 1/fraction of an inch. He put his hat back on. "Fair enough," he said. It was only then that she noticed them. The boy was maybe 8, dark-haired like his father, with his father's same straight posture and his father's same watchful eyes. Except where Silas's eyes held stillness, the boy's held a spark, bright and restless and assessing. He had his thumbs hooked in his suspenders, and he was looking at Clara the way a person looks at something that has walked into the wrong place. The girl was smaller, 6, maybe 7. She stood just half a step behind her brother with her hands folded in front of her, her dark hair braided back, and she was not looking at Clara at all. She was looking at her shoes. Clara glanced at Silas. Silas did not explain. "These your children?" Clara asked, though she already knew. She could see his jaw in the boy's jaw, his stillness in the girl's careful posture. "My son Jake," Silas said. "My daughter Emma." Jake gave her a long, measuring look. "Pa said you were coming from New York City." "That's right," Clara said. "Why?" "Jake," Silas said. One word, that was all. The boy pressed his lips together. Clara almost smiled in spite of herself. "It's all right," she said. She crouched down so she was eye level with him. Up close, Jake had a smear of something, dirt or ash or both, across his left cheekbone, and a small cut healing at his chin that suggested he'd recently lost an argument with the ground. "I left because I wanted something different." "Different from what?" "From everything I already had." Jake considered this with the seriousness of someone 3 times his age. "Didn't you like it there?" "I liked parts of it," Clara said honestly. "But liking something and belonging to it aren't the same thing." Jake had nothing to say to that. He looked at his father. Silas was watching Clara with that same unreadable gray expression. She stood back up, brushed the dust from her skirt, and looked at Emma. Emma still wasn't looking at her. "Hello, Emma," Clara said gently. Emma's fingers tightened against each other. After a long moment, she lifted her eyes, brown, deep, careful, and met Clara's for exactly 1 second before dropping them again. "Hello," Emma whispered. That was all. But something about the smallness of it, the courage it took for the child to say even that one quiet word, landed somewhere inside Clara's chest and stayed there. Silas picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and started walking. "Wagons this way," he said. Clara followed. The ride to the ranch took 40 minutes, and Silas spent most of them in silence. Jake spent most of them asking questions about New York, about what the buildings looked like, whether she'd ever seen the ocean, whether she'd ever been in a fight. And Clara answered each one as fully and honestly as she could, because she had the sense that honesty was the only currency that would buy her anything with this child. Emma sat beside her brother and said nothing, but Clara caught her watching more than once from the corner of those careful brown eyes. "Do you know how to ride?" Jake asked. "No," Clara admitted. "Do you know how to shoot?" "Jake," Silas said from the front, "I'm just asking." "No," Clara said, "I don't know how to shoot either." Jake absorbed this. "Do you know how to do anything useful?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it, thought with unexpected fairness about what the honest answer actually was. She could play piano. She could arrange flowers. She could navigate a dinner party seating chart and conduct a polite conversation in French. She could dress herself in 14 minutes and arrive looking like she'd been groomed for 2 hours. "I can learn," she said finally. Jake looked at her, looked at his father's back, looked back at her. "Pa says that's the most important thing, being willing to learn. Your father sounds like a smart man." "He is," Jake said without hesitation or irony. "He's the smartest man I know." Clara looked at the back of Silas Drifter's shoulders, the set of them straight and steady, the reins loose and easy in his large, roughened hands, and said nothing. The ranch house was not what she had pictured. She had not, if she was being honest with herself, pictured anything luxurious. She'd understood in the abstract that this would be a working ranch, a simple life, nothing like the brownstone she'd grown up in with its gas lamps and Persian rugs, and a cook who made breakfast at 7 and dinner at 8. She'd understood that. She'd told herself she was prepared. She had not been prepared. The house was a single-story timber frame with a covered porch that listed slightly to one side, and a front door that had been repaired at least twice by someone who hadn't quite matched the original wood. The yard was clean swept, she would realize later, probably by Emma, but spare. A well, a fence that needed 2 of its rails replaced, a stand of cottonwood trees along the far edge that threw shade across the afternoon. There was nothing beautiful about it, nothing curated or carefully arranged. It was purely, entirely functional, and it made no apology for that. Silas carried her trunk up the porch steps and through the front door. Inside, the air was cooler, shadowed. Clara followed and stood in the main room and looked. A long table, 4 chairs, a cook stove, shelves along one wall holding tin plates and cups and a row of jars, a stone fireplace that took up most of the far wall. On the mantel, 2 things, a small Bible with a cracked spine, and a framed daguerreotype, a woman, dark-haired, with Emma's eyes and Jake's stubborn set of chin. Clara looked at the photograph for longer than she meant to. "That's our mama," Jake said from beside her. She hadn't heard him come in. "She's beautiful," Clara said. "She died," Jake said. 2 years ago. Fever." "I'm sorry," Clara said. Jake shrugged, but it was the shrug of someone who had practiced it. Practiced looking like it didn't still reach right into his chest every time it came up. "Pa doesn't talk about it. Emma cries sometimes, but she tries to do it where nobody sees." Clara looked down at him. He was watching the photograph with an expression that was too old for his face. "Do you cry?" she asked quietly. Jake's jaw tightened exactly like his father's. "No," he said. "It's all right if you do," Clara said. "I know," he said. "I just don't." Silas appeared in the doorway that led to the back of the house. "I put your trunk in the room on the left," he said to Clara. A pause, barely a pause at all, but she caught it. The spare room. Yours now. Clara understood without needing him to explain further, and she didn't ask him to. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, turned. Supper's in 2 hours. Jake, go check on the horses. Yes, sir. Jake went. Emma had materialized from somewhere, Clara hadn't seen her come in, and was now at the cook stove, arranging kindling with the methodical focus of a child who had been doing this particular task long enough to know exactly how she wanted it done. Clara watched her for a moment. Then she moved to the other side of the stove. Can I help? Emma stilled. She looked at Clara from beneath her lashes, that same quick, assessing look. Then she very carefully moved one piece of kindling to the left and pointed at the empty space it had left. Clara picked up a piece of wood from the pile and placed it where Emma had indicated. Emma studied it, adjusted it slightly, gave a small, satisfied nod. It was the closest thing to welcome Clara had received since stepping off the stagecoach, and it settled somewhere in her chest like warmth. Supper that evening was beans and salt pork and cornbread made by Silas in the time it took Clara to wash the travel dust from her face and change her dress. The four of them sat at the table. Jake talked about the horses, about a fence that had gone down in the south field, about a hawk's nest he'd found in the cottonwoods. Silas responded in short, direct sentences. Emma ate carefully and said almost nothing, and Clara sat in her chair and felt the particular vertigo of a person who has stepped entirely outside of everything they have ever known. The table settings were mismatched. The cornbread was slightly underdone in the center and slightly overdone at the edges. There was no wine, no cloth napkin, no candlelight. There was just the early evening coming through the window and the sound of a family that had learned to exist without one of its members and had made a kind of peace with the shape of that absence. "Do you cook?" Silas asked her without looking up from his plate. "Some," Clara said, which was generous. She had boiled water. She had assembled cold plates. She had once memorably attempted biscuits and produced something her sister had compared, not unkindly, to chalk. "I'll teach you what you need to know," Silas said. "I'd appreciate that." He glanced up then, briefly. Something in her voice, the absence of pride in it, perhaps, or the presence of actual willingness, made him look at her for a half-second longer than he had been. Then he looked back down. "We start early," he said. 4:30 most mornings." 4:30, Clara repeated. "Cows don't sleep late," Jake offered helpfully. "No," Clara said. "I don't suppose they do." After supper, Jake helped clear the table with the practiced ease of a child long accustomed to chores, stacking the tin plates in a way that suggested a specific order had been established and maintained. Emma brought the water in from outside, a bucket almost as large as she was, carried with both hands, careful and unhurried. Clara reached for it instinctively. "I can," she started. Emma shook her head. "Just once." She set the bucket where it belonged beside the basin and began to pour. Clara lowered her hands and stepped back. "All right," she thought. "You carry your own water." Noted. Silas came in from checking the horses while Jake was washing up. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the room, at Emma pouring water, at Clara standing nearby, not quite knowing what to do with herself. And something passed across his face that Clara couldn't name. "Jake," he said, "take your sister and get ready for bed." "It's not even dark yet," Jake said. "Jake." Jake made a sound that was not quite a complaint and not quite a sigh, and was perhaps both at once. "Yes, sir." He looked at Clara. "Good night, Miss Ashford." "Good night, Jake," she said. Emma paused in her work. For a moment, Clara thought she wouldn't say anything. Then, in that same small, careful voice, "Good night." "Good night, Emma," Clara said, and meant it more than she'd meant most things she'd said all day. The children disappeared into the back hallway. Clara and Silas stood in the main room, and the silence that settled between them now was different from the silence in the wagon. Less wide, perhaps, but somehow more present. The way a closed door feels more specific than open air. Silas moved to the mantel and stood with his back to her for a moment. Clara sat in one of the chairs at the table and folded her hands and waited. "I should tell you some things," he said. "All right," she said. He turned around. He leaned against the mantel with his arms crossed and looked at her directly, The first time all evening he'd looked at her like he was actually seeing her, rather than assessing whether she would be a problem. "The agency told me you were suitable for ranch life. I don't know what they base that on." "Probably my letter," Clara said. "I may have overstated my experience with outdoor work." "Probably." He paused. "The children need consistency. They've had a hard 2 years." "I can see that." "Emma doesn't warm up quickly. I don't want you to take it personal." "I won't," Clara said. She hesitated, then added, "She let me help with the kindling." Something in his face shifted. "She did?" "She showed me where to put it," Clara said, very specifically. For the first time, something that might, in the right light, qualify as a real expression moved through Silas Drifter's eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. "That's Emma," he said. "Her way of saying you're all right." "I'll take it," Clara said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to be straight with you, Miss Ashford. I'm not an easy man to live with. I know that. I work long days and I don't have a lot left over at the end of them. I can promise you a roof and food and fair treatment. I can't promise you much else." Clara looked at him, at the set of his jaw, the careful, uncomfortable effort of a man who was used to saying very little, finding the words for something he felt he owed her. She thought about the parlor back home in New York, the silk drapes, the smell of her mother's perfume, the endless rotation of society dinners where men said beautiful, empty things across candlelit tables and meant none of them. "Mr. Drifter," she said, "the man I nearly married in New York promised me the world and couldn't keep a single one of his promises. I'll take a roof and fair treatment and a man who says what he means over that arrangement every single time." Silas looked at her for a long moment. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. "Really?" It was a fair question, a brave one, actually. She thought braver than most men would have been. She owed him an honest answer. "My father died last winter," she said. "Left debts. My mother had already remarried, and her new husband made it very clear that my presence in that house was a temporary accommodation. The man I was supposed to marry decided, on reflection, that a woman without a fortune was a woman without appeal." She paused. "So I wrote to the agency." Silas said nothing. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said. "I'm telling you because you asked what was real, and that's real. Your family know you're here. My sister does. She cried and told me I was making a terrible mistake, and then helped me pack my trunk." Clara felt the particular ache of that memory, her sister's hands folding her things, face wet, voice steady. "She's the best person I know." "You close?" "Very." Silas nodded slowly. "Must have been hard leaving." "It was," Clara said, "but staying would have been harder." He pushed himself off the mantel and moved toward the hallway. At the doorway he stopped. "I'll be up at 4, he said. "Coffee's on the second shelf. Emma can show you the rest in the morning." "Mr. Drifter," Clara said. He stopped. "Thank you for being honest with me," she said. "I know that took something." He didn't turn around, but his shoulders shifted slightly under his shirt. "Get some rest, Miss Ashford. Tomorrow starts early." And then he was gone, and Clara was alone in the main room of a house that was nothing like anything she had ever lived in a town she had never seen before. Married, nearly married, legally bound to a man she had spoken perhaps 30 sentences to, with 2 children who were watching her from a careful distance, and an enormous and uncertain future spread out in all directions like flat Texas land. She sat for a while in the chair. She could hear the wind outside moving through the cottonwoods. She could hear, very faintly, the creak of the house settling. She looked at the daguerreotype on the mantel, the woman with Emma's eyes. She wondered what she had been like, whether she had laughed easily or rarely, whether she had been the kind of woman who filled a room, or the kind who made the room quieter and better just by being in it. She wondered if Silas had loved her loudly or quietly, and knew without really knowing that it had been quietly. She thought about Emma letting her place one piece of kindling in the right spot. She thought about Jake asking, without malice and without cruelty, whether she knew how to do anything useful. She thought about Silas standing at the mantel, arms crossed, choosing honesty over comfort. She pressed her palms flat on the table in front of her, and she made a decision. The same decision she had made in the moment she signed her name to that agency letter. The same one she had renewed with every mile of the journey. She was going to make this work. Not because it was easy, and not because it was what she'd imagined, but because giving up was something she'd already done once in a well-lit parlor in New York, with a man who'd never deserved her, and she was not going to do it again. She stood. She went to the second shelf and found the coffee and set the pot where she'd need it in the morning. She looked around the kitchen at the jars, the shelves, the basin, memorizing it. Then she went to the room on the left with her trunk and her worn-down boots and the crumpled letter still in her coat pocket. She lay down on a narrow bed that smelled of pine wood and clean air. She listened to the Texas night. She did not cry. Outside in the dark of the yard, she heard the sound of boots on the porch. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. Then stillness. Silas, she thought, checking the property one last time before bed, the same way he would have done every night for years, the same way he would do it tomorrow night, and the night after, and every night that followed. Because that was who he was, a man who checked the fence line and turned off the lamp and got up before dawn and kept doing what needed doing, no matter what. She closed her eyes. She thought, I don't know this man. And then, surprising herself completely, but I think I could. 4:30 came like a punishment. Clara had barely slept. The unfamiliar sounds of the ranch kept pulling her back from the edge of rest. Wind through cottonwood, something moving in the yard, the deep silence that had none of the city noise she'd grown up in. And when the darkness outside her window was still total and the cold had crept in under the door, she heard it. Boots already moving through the house, already purposeful. She lay still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she got up. She was at the cook stove before the coffee had finished, trying to remember the shelf, trying to remember where Emma had shown her the damper lever, managing barely to get the fire going without burning anything that wasn't supposed to burn. She had her hair pinned back and her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her good dress traded for the plainest one she'd packed, the dark blue wool, the one her sister had called sensible, and she had called ugly. She was standing over the stove, trying to figure out the proportions for coffee, when Silas walked in. He stopped. He looked at the stove, at the coffee, at her. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "How much grounds?" He studied her for a moment, that careful, measuring look she was beginning to recognize. Then he moved to stand beside her and reached past her to the tin. His hand was large enough that when he scooped the grounds, one motion was sufficient. "That much," he said. "Right," she said. "I would have used twice that. You'd have been chewing your coffee. That would have been unpleasant." "It is," he said, and that was as close to a joke as Silas Drifter appeared to get at 4:30 in the morning. But Clara recognized it for what it was and tucked it away. They worked in silence for a few minutes, him at the table pulling on his work gloves, her managing the coffee with considerably more concentration than the task probably warranted. Then Jake appeared in the hallway, hair still flattened from sleep, boots already on. Clara realized this was simply what mornings looked like here. No gradual easing into the day, no breakfast in bed or newspaper delivered to the door, just darkness and cold, and the immediate, unapologetic demands of living. "Emma's still asleep," Jake said, dropping into his chair. "Let her," Silas said. Jake looked at Clara. "You made coffee." "I supervised the coffee," Clara said honestly. "Your father did the critical part." Jake seemed to find this acceptable. He pulled the cornbread left from the night before toward himself and broke off a piece with the unself-conscious appetite of a child who never questioned whether food would be there. "Pa says you're from Manhattan." "That's right." "Is it true they have buildings so tall you can't see the top?" "Some of them," Clara said. "You have to lean your head back." Jake chewed this alongside his cornbread. "Doesn't seem natural," he decided. "No," Clara agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." Silas stood and drained his cup in one long pull and set it on the table. "South fence needs checking," he said to Jake. "After that, the east water trough." "Yes, sir." Jake stood, grabbing another piece of cornbread. "Miss Ashford." Silas looked at her. "Emma will be up within the hour. She'll show you the garden and the chickens." He paused. "Don't let her carry anything heavier than she can manage. She'll try." It was such a specific, quiet piece of fatherly knowledge, the understanding that his daughter's stubbornness exceeded her size, that Clara felt it land somewhere she hadn't expected. "I'll watch for it," she said. He put his hat on and went out with Jake at his heels. The house went back to its particular silence. Clara stood in the kitchen with her two strong opinions about buildings and her not yet adequate opinions about coffee, and waited for the smaller of the two drifter children to wake up. Emma appeared without announcement. One moment the hallway was empty. The next, Emma was standing at its edge in her dress and boots, her braid from last night only half fallen, watching Clara with those deep, careful eyes. "Good morning," Clara said. Emma nodded. "Your father said you'd show me the garden." Emma's chin dipped again. She went to the shelf and got herself a piece of cornbread and ate it standing, methodical, not rushed, just efficient in the way of someone who has decided that sitting down for breakfast alone is an unnecessary step. Then she went to the door and looked back at Clara. Clara followed. The garden was larger than she'd expected. Emma moved through it with a proprietary certainty, pointing at things: beans, squash, a row of something Clara identified eventually as carrots, and Clara followed along, naming them aloud as a kind of confirmation. Emma would nod once if she got it right and say nothing if she got it wrong, which Clara found both challenging and fair. The chickens were a disaster. Not a catastrophic one, but when Clara reached into the first nesting box the way Emma silently indicated, she startled the hen inside, who responded by expressing herself with wings and sound in a way that sent Clara backward 3 full steps. Emma, for the first time since Clara had arrived, made a sound. It was a laugh, small, quickly smothered, both hands coming up to cover her mouth. But it was a laugh, real and bright and entirely childlike, and it lit her face in a way that made Clara see, briefly and startlingly, what Emma might look like when the careful quietness wasn't something she needed to wear. "I take it that's not the right approach," Clara said, pressing her hand to her chest. Emma shook her head. She moved to the box, reached in slowly, spoke something to the hen in a low murmur that Clara couldn't quite hear, and retrieved the egg with a confidence so complete the hen barely ruffled. "Show me," Clara said. Emma looked at her. Then she moved aside and waited. Clara went back to the box. She breathed. She moved slowly, the way Emma had moved, and she said, feeling slightly ridiculous, "Excuse me, ma'am," to the hen, and reached in, and came out with a warm brown egg intact in her palm. When she turned around, Emma was watching her with an expression that was not quite approval, but was closer to it than anything Clara had received in the past 24 hours. She held up one finger. "One down," Clara said. "How many more?" Emma held up 8 fingers. "8?" Clara said. "All right." She squared her shoulders. "Let's go." By the time they'd gotten through all 9 boxes, Clara handling 7, Emma handling the 2 she'd privately decided were the most temperamental, something between them had shifted. Nothing dramatic, no declarations. Just the small, specific warmth of 2 people who have accomplished a task together and both know it. They were walking back to the house, eggs gathered in Emma's basket, when Emma stopped. Clara stopped beside her. Emma was looking toward the south field where the fence line ran. Her brow was furrowed in a way that didn't look like a child's expression of simple confusion, but something more considered, more worried. "What is it?" Clara asked. Emma turned and looked at her, opened her mouth, then very quietly, very carefully. "Jake went that way." "Your father sent him to check the fence," Clara said. Emma's frown deepened. She shook her head, not contradicting Clara's words, but adding something to them. She looked at the field again. "Emma," Clara said, keeping her voice level, "is something wrong with that fence?" A pause. Then Emma touched her own arm, just below the elbow. A strange gesture. "Did something happen to Jake there before?" Clara asked. Emma dropped her hand, said nothing, but her eyes were telling a story her mouth wouldn't. Before Clara could ask anything further, they heard it. Jake's voice from somewhere in the direction of the south field, carrying clear and sharp across the still morning air. Not words, just the shape of a voice raised in urgency. And both of them started moving at the same time. What they found was not a catastrophe, but it was close enough to make Clara's heart do something violent in her chest. Jake was on the ground on the far side of the fence, his back against a post, holding his right arm against his body. The wire, old wire, rusted at the joints, with edges that had no interest in being merciful, had caught him when the post shifted unexpectedly under his weight. He was not crying. His jaw was set exactly like his father's. "I'm fine," he said immediately when he saw them. "It's fine." "Show me your arm," Clara said. "It's fine, Miss Ashford." "Jake." She was through the fence before she'd consciously decided to move, and she crouched in front of him and said again, more quietly, "Show me your arm." He looked at her for a moment, with the particular conflict of a boy who has been told by every instinct he possesses that showing hurt is a weakness, and who is, underneath all of that, still 8 years old and in pain. Then he extended his arm. The cut ran from just below his elbow to his wrist. Not deep enough to be truly dangerous, but long and angry, already beginning to swell at the edges. Clara looked at it and felt the cold, practical part of herself take over, the part that had once handled her mother's fainting spells and her father's illness, and the particular domestic crises that high society women were supposed to manage behind the appearance of perfect composure. "It needs cleaning and binding," she said. "Can you walk?" "I said I'm fine." "I know you did," Clara said. "Can you walk?" His jaw tightened further. Then he stood, in one motion, without using the arm. "Yes." Emma had not made a sound. She was standing just outside the fence, with the egg basket still in both hands, her face white and still. Clara caught her eye over Jake's shoulder. "He's all right," Clara said. "It's not as bad as it looks." Emma looked at her brother, at his arm, back at Clara. She gave one small, tight nod. "Come on," Clara said to Jake. "Let's get back to the house." He walked beside her and did not ask for help and did not complain. She stayed close enough to catch him if he needed it, and far enough to let him pretend he didn't. Emma walked on his other side. None of them spoke. And Clara thought, with a sudden fierce clarity, these children have been getting through hard things alone for 2 years, and the automatic instinct of both of them is still to say they're fine. Back in the house, she found clean cloth and boiled water and the small bottle of carbolic she'd spotted on the shelf the night before. She'd noticed it because she'd been noticing everything, cataloging the house the way she cataloged everything she needed to understand. Jake sat at the table and held his arm still while she cleaned the wound. The only sign he gave of the pain was a single sharp intake of breath when the carbolic hit, and then silence. "You should tell your father," Clara said, wrapping the cloth. "It'll worry him. He'll be more worried if he finds out you hit it." Jake looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because," Clara said, tying off the bandage with a firm, neat knot, "a man who gets up at 4:30 every morning and walks the fence line every night is not a man who wants things hidden from him. He wants to know what's real." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then, "Pa's not big on talking about things." "No," Clara agreed. "But there's a difference between not talking about something and not knowing about it." Jake considered this with the same seriousness he brought to everything. "Like how he doesn't talk about Mama," he said. "But it doesn't mean he's forgotten." Clara's hand stilled on the knot. "Like that," she said. Exactly like that. Emma, who had set the egg basket down by the door and had been standing very still and very quiet for the past several minutes, made a small sound, not quite a word. Clara and Jake both looked at her. She was looking at Jake's bandaged arm. Her hands were knotted at her sides. "Emmy," Jake said in a voice completely different from the one he used for everything else. Softer, more careful. The voice of a brother who has been protecting his little sister for long enough that it has become as natural as breathing. "I'm okay." Emma's chin trembled once. Then she pressed her lips together, and it stopped. She lifted her chin and looked at Clara with those deep, serious eyes. And she said more words than she'd said since Clara arrived. "You fixed it." "I did," Clara said. "Good," Emma said. And then she went and picked up the egg basket and carried it to the counter and began to put the eggs away one by one, with her back straight and her hands steady. Jake looked at Clara. His expression was something she couldn't fully read. "She didn't let the other one do that," he said carefully. Clara stilled. "The other one?" "The woman who came before you, from the agency. She was here for 4 days. Emma wouldn't let her near the chickens or the garden or anything. She left and said the children were—" He stopped. "Said what?" Jake's voice dropped flat and matter-of-fact, the way of someone quoting something that was said about him as though it weren't about him at all. Wild. Difficult. Beyond managing. Clara looked at the back of Emma's head, at the careful, deliberate way she was setting each egg in its place, at the particular kind of self-possession that was not coldness but protection, the armor of a child who had lost too much too fast, and had learned the very hard lesson that letting someone in meant risking them leaving. "She was wrong," Clara said. Jake looked at her. "She was wrong," Clara said again, more quietly. "There is nothing wild or difficult about either of you. There's just two children who've had to be braver than children should have to be." Jake was quiet for a long time. Emma didn't turn around, but her hands slowed on the eggs. "You're different," Jake said finally. Not a compliment exactly, not quite an accusation. Just an observation, offered with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to dress his conclusions in softer language. "Different from what?" Clara asked. "From what I thought you'd be." He paused, searching. "I thought you'd be like glass, breakable, the kind of person who stands in the middle of a room and waits for everyone else to move around her." Clara almost smiled. "And now?" Jake looked at her bandage work on his arm. "You didn't flinch. When you saw it, you just did what needed doing." "That's all there is to do," Clara said, "when something needs doing." Jake nodded slowly. The nod of someone who has just filed a piece of information away in the place where important things are kept. It was another hour before Silas came back. He came through the door the way he always did, directly, purposefully, already scanning the room out of habit. He saw Jake's arm before Jake had a chance to say anything, and his face did something immediate and wordless that Clara recognized as a parent's particular fear, the fear that runs faster than thought. "What happened?" he said. Not a question, a demand. "South fence post shifted," Jake said. "Wire caught me." "It's not bad. Let me see it." Jake extended his arm. Silas unwrapped the bandage with careful, practiced hands, looked at the wound beneath, looked at the bandage, looked at his son's face. "You walked back on your own?" "Yes, sir." "Head feel all right? No dizziness?" "No, sir." Silas rewrapped the arm, slightly differently than Clara had, she noticed, more evenly tensioned, and he held his son's elbow in both hands for a moment. Just held it. No words. Just the weight of his hands and the steadiness of them. And Jake sat very still and let that be enough. Then Silas looked up across the table at Clara. "You did this," he said, meaning the bandaging, the carbolic, the cleaning. "Yes," she said. He looked at it again, at the neatness of the original work, at the carbolic on the shelf where she'd left it out for visibility. He looked back at her, and in his careful gray eyes was something she hadn't seen there before. Not gratitude exactly, not surprise exactly, but something at the overlap of both. Something that a man who guarded his expressions the way Silas Drifter did let show only when he'd been caught off guard and hadn't had time to put it away. "Thank you," he said. It was 2 words, plain and direct, entirely without decoration, and it landed with more weight than any elaborate compliment Clara had received in any gaslit parlor in New York. "It needed doing," she said, and Silas Drifter looked at her, really looked at her for the second time since she'd arrived, and said nothing more, but he didn't look away either, not right away. He held her gaze for a moment that was exactly long enough to mean something. Then he put his hat back on and said to Jake, "After lunch, you and I look at that post." "Yes, sir," Jake said. "And next time," Silas said, pausing at the door, "you tell me straight off." Jake's chin dipped. "Yes, sir." Silas went back out. The door closed behind him. Jake exhaled a long, quiet breath that suggested he'd been holding it and looked at Clara. "He's not mad," Jake told her, as though she might need the translation. "I know," Clara said. "He gets quiet when he's relieved," Jake said. "Everybody thinks it's the other thing, but it's not." Clara looked at the door that Silas had just gone through, at the place where he'd stood, at the plain, particular weight of a man putting his hands around his son's arm and holding on. "I'm learning that," she said quietly. "He's not that hard," Jake said, picking up his fork with his good arm. "Once you know what you're looking at." And Clara thought, no, maybe he isn't. The days began to stack up on each other, each one a little less foreign than the one before. Clara learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way you learn a language you were never taught in school. By immersion, by mistake, by the particular embarrassment of getting something wrong in front of people who know better and choosing to try again anyway. She learned which chickens would tolerate her and which would not. She learned that the water from the east pump ran cold and clean, while the west pump had a handle that stuck and required a specific technique involving her full body weight and a kind of controlled frustration. She learned that Jake's version of "I'll be back in a minute" meant anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour and a half, and that Emma's silence at breakfast was not sadness but concentration. The child thought deeply before she was ready to engage with the world, and the world, Clara was beginning to believe, would do well to respect that. She was learning Silas too, slowly. In the same way you learn a terrain by walking it repeatedly, by noticing which ground was solid and which shifted underfoot, by paying attention to what was always there and what only appeared in certain light. He was not a man who wasted words, but he was not, she was discovering, a man who wasted anything, not motion, not effort, not the particular attention he brought to everything he did. She had watched him that second morning teach Jake how to retension the repaired fence post, his hands guiding the boys without impatience, explaining once, and then letting Jake do it, stepping back, watching, correcting only when correction was genuinely needed. She had watched him that evening sit beside Emma at the table while the girl worked through an arithmetic problem in her school primer. And she had seen the way he waited, not rushing her, not filling the silence with hints, just present, solid, letting Emma come to the answer herself, and rewarding it, not with praise, but with a single nod that somehow contained more affirmation than most people managed in paragraphs. It was on the fourth morning that Clara burned the biscuits, not slightly, completely. She had been so focused on not undercooking the center, a mistake she'd made twice already, that she'd overcompensated. What came out of the oven were 12 objects that could most charitably be described as a fire hazard. Jake stared at them with the expression of a child attempting with genuine effort to find something diplomatic to say. Emma picked one up, tapped it on the table, and set it back down. Clara pressed her lips together. "They're terrible." Jake started. "Jake, they're real bad," he admitted. "I know." She sat down, looked at the biscuits, felt something between laughter and despair moving through her chest. "I followed the proportions exactly." "Did you use the baking powder or the baking soda?" Silas asked from the doorway. Clara turned. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, hat already on. "The white powder in the jar on the right," she said. Silas closed his eyes briefly. "That's the salt." Silence. "How much did you use?" he asked. She told him. Jake made a sound that was absolutely a smothered laugh. Clara looked at the biscuits. 12 small, perfectly formed, completely inedible salt rocks. "I made 12 salt biscuits." "You made 12 very committed salt biscuits," Silas said. And there it was again, that fractional movement at the corner of his mouth, that barely there concession to something that wanted to be a smile. Emma looked up at Clara. Her eyes were bright. Her lips were pressed together very hard. "Go ahead," Clara told her. Emma laughed. Not the small, quickly covered sound from the chicken coop. This was fuller, genuine, a child's real laugh, and it changed her whole face. Jake immediately joined in, and Clara sat there in front of her catastrophic biscuits and felt something warm move through her chest that had nothing to do with the cook stove. Even Silas's mouth gave up its restraint for a moment, just a moment, but she saw it. "I'll teach you the shelf system today," he said, "before you salt anything else." "That would be wise," Clara agreed. He did teach her, standing at the shelf in the kitchen, systematically moving each jar and tin and explaining its contents in the same plain, direct way he explained everything. Clara listened carefully and asked specific questions, and he answered each one without impatience. By the end of it, she understood that what looked like a disorganized collection of containers was in fact a highly organized system that had simply never been labeled because the person who built it had never imagined anyone else would need to use it. "Your wife arranged it this way?" Clara asked before she'd entirely decided to. The question landed in the kitchen and sat there. Silas was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. Clara nodded, didn't push. He surprised her. "She was a good cook," he said. Not painfully, just factually, the way he said most things. "Better than me. The children got used to." He stopped. "Emma has her way of doing things because of how she learned them," Clara said. "She learned from her mother." "Yes." Clara looked at the shelf, the jars, the careful system, the order that a woman she would never meet had built into the bones of this house. "I'll try not to change things that don't need changing." Silas looked at her. It was a measuring look, but there was something different in it this time. Less weariness, more consideration. "Some things could use changing," he said, which was, Clara understood, more than he'd intended to say. He picked up his hat from the table. "The baking powder is the jar second from the left, third shelf." "Second from the left, third shelf," Clara repeated. He went out. Clara stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the shelf. Then she picked up the jar of baking powder, held it in her hand for a moment, and set it back in exactly the right place. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday in the form of a wagon. Clara was in the garden with Emma. They had developed a genuine routine by now, the two of them working through the rows with an efficiency that had grown naturally out of repetition. When she heard it coming down the road, and Emma heard it too, and something happened to the child's face that Clara noticed immediately. A tightening, a closing off, the way a door swings shut when wind catches it. "Emma," Clara said. "Who is it?" Emma's eyes tracked the wagon, her hand stilled in the dirt. She didn't answer. The wagon pulled up to the front of the house, and the man who climbed down was broad and well-dressed by Sagebrush Hollow standards. Not rich, but deliberate about appearance in a way that communicated he wanted to be seen as significant. He had a thick mustache and the particular walk of someone accustomed to arriving places and being received. Clara put him at 50, maybe a little more, with the kind of face that knew how to arrange itself into friendliness without actually achieving it. He saw Clara before he saw Emma. "Well now," he said, "you must be the new Mrs. Drifter." "Miss Ashford," Clara said. "And you are?" He smiled, wide immediately, the smile of a man who had decided he liked the look of her. "Gerald Hatch. I run the Hatch Ranch east of here, biggest operation in the county." He said it the way men say things they believe should settle matters. "I've got business with Silas." "He's in the south field," Clara said. "I can let him know you're here." "Much appreciated." Hatch's eyes moved past her, found Emma still crouched at the garden edge, and the smile contracted. Not by much, but enough. "Hello there, Emma." Emma said nothing. She had gone very still in the particular way a small animal goes still when something larger moves nearby. Clara stepped, without thinking about it, slightly to the left, between Hatch and Emma. "I'll get Silas," she said. She sent Jake, who materialized from the direction of the barn at the exact right moment, the way Jake always seemed to when something interesting was happening. He took in Hatch with one long look, his expression flat and unchildlike, and ran for the south field without being asked twice. By the time Silas came back, Clara had positioned herself on the porch with Emma close beside her, and she'd offered Hatch water because it was the appropriate thing to do and kept the interaction on her terms. Hatch had accepted the water and spent the waiting time telling her things about his ranch that she hadn't asked about and didn't particularly want to know. She listened pleasantly and said very little, and watched his eyes. His eyes, she noticed, were always slightly somewhere else. Never quite where his attention claimed to be. Silas came directly to the porch, Jake at his heels. The change in Hatch when he saw him was interesting to observe. The smile widened. The posture shifted. The entire presentation reorganized itself into something between deference and pressure. And Clara thought, these two men have a history that isn't comfortable. "Silas," Hatch said, "good to see you. I was just getting acquainted with your new—" He gestured at Clara in a way that was technically polite and actually something else. "Miss Ashford," Silas said. "What is it you need, Gerald?" The first name use was not warmth. Clara could hear the difference. Hatch leaned against the porch rail like a man who had decided to be comfortable regardless of whether he'd been invited to. "I wanted to talk to you about the water rights on North Creek. Deed office says the original surveys got some ambiguity." Silas's face did not change. The original survey says clearly that the creek runs through drifter land. Well, that's the thing. Hatch smiled in the way of someone about to be very reasonable. Old surveys weren't always careful. I've had a man look at it. Seems like there's a good argument the north boundary is off by half a mile. Half a mile? Give or take. That half mile is where my east pasture sits, Silas said, along with 3 years of fence work and my primary water source. Hatch spread his hands. Silas, I'm not trying to make trouble. I just think it would be worth sitting down with the county clerk, getting it sorted properly. Friendly-like, Clara was watching Silas's hands. They had not moved. They were perfectly still at his sides, which she was beginning to understand was not relaxation, but its precise opposite, the complete, deliberate stillness of a man who has decided exactly how much of his reaction the situation deserves. "I'll look at the deed," Silas said, "same as I always have, and it'll say the same thing it's always said." Hatch nodded slowly, with an expression of manufactured patience. "Of course, you do that." He straightened, settled his hat. His eyes moved to Clara again, then to Emma, then back to Silas. "Nice to have a woman on the place again. Good for the children." He said it like a generous observation. It landed like something else. Silas said nothing. The silence held for exactly long enough. Hatch climbed back into his wagon. As he picked up the reins, he looked at Silas one more time. "Think about what I said. Friendly resolution is better than the alternative." He said it pleasantly. He drove away pleasantly. He left behind something that was not pleasant at all. Jake watched the wagon go. His jaw was his father's jaw, set hard. "I don't like him." "Jake," Silas said. "I know," Jake said, "but I don't." Emma had come to stand beside Clara. She wasn't touching her. Emma rarely touched anyone, but she was close, closer than she usually stood. Clara looked down at her. Emma was watching the wagon disappear, and her face was doing that closed-off door-shut thing again. "Emma," Clara said quietly, "has he been here before?" Emma looked up at her. Then, with a deliberateness that felt important, she nodded. "When your father wasn't home?" Emma's chin dipped once. Clara looked at Silas. He had caught the exchange. His eyes had gone a shade darker, not angry, or not only angry, but the particular expression of a man who has just been told something he'd suspected, but not confirmed. "Go inside," he said to the children, "both of you." Jake went without argument, which told Clara he'd read the room. Emma went too, pausing only to look once more at Clara before she disappeared through the door. Clara stayed on the porch. "You don't have to," Silas started. "What does he actually want?" Clara asked. Silas was quiet. "Not the creek," Clara said, "or not only the creek. What does he actually want?" Silas looked at the road where Hatch's wagon had gone. "This land has been in debt since my wife got sick," he said. "Medical costs, then the funeral, then a bad year with the cattle." He said it the way he said everything, plainly, without drama, the way you state facts you've already made your peace with. "Hatch has been watching this property for 3 years. He knows the numbers. And the water rights dispute gives him a legal entry point," Clara said. Silas looked at her. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, but a recalibration, the adjustment a person makes when someone understands something faster than expected. "Yes," he said. "Do you have the deed?" "Inside, in the trunk under my bed." "Then we look at it tonight," Clara said. "And tomorrow you go to the county clerk yourself, before Hatch has a chance to have another conversation with them." Silas studied her. "You know about deeds." "My father was in property investment," Clara said. "I spent half my childhood watching him go over documents at the dinner table. I know what a fraudulent survey argument looks like." She paused. "And I know what a man who makes friendly threats looks like. Because my father dealt with those too." The silence between them now was different from any of the silences that had come before. This one had weight to it. Not the weight of distance, but the weight of something being considered carefully by a man who did not consider things carelessly. "You're full of surprises, Miss Ashford," Silas said quietly. "Clara," she said. He looked at her. "If we're going to fight a land dispute together," she said, "you might as well call me Clara." Something moved through his eyes that she felt in her chest before she had a name for it. Then he looked back at the road. "All right," he said. "Clara." Her name in his mouth was nothing elaborate, just 2 syllables spoken plainly, the way he spoke everything. But she felt it settle somewhere that mattered, and she did not examine that too closely because there were more important things to attend to. There was a deed to find, and a man to get to the county clerk before sundown tomorrow, and 2 children inside who had been afraid of Gerald Hatch coming to this property while their father wasn't home. And that last fact, that specific fact, had taken up residence in the cold, practical part of Clara Ashford's chest, and was generating a heat that surprised her with its intensity. She was not sure exactly when this family had become something she intended to protect. She was fairly certain it had already happened. The deed was older than Clara expected. Silas brought it to the table after supper, a folded document yellowed at the creases, the ink in some places faded to the color of dried grass. He set it flat and stood back, and Clara sat down and spread it carefully with both hands and read. She read it twice. Then she sat back. "This is clear," she said. "I know it's clear," Silas said. "Then Hatch knows it's clear too." She looked up. "Which means the survey argument isn't his real strategy. It's a distraction." Silas pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He had his arms on the table and his hands laced together, and he was watching her with that careful, considering expression she'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was listening harder than he appeared to be. "What do you think the real strategy is?" Clara looked at the deed again, at the date. At the property boundaries spelled out in the precise, formal language of a land office 30 years ago. "You said you've had debt since your wife got sick." He knows the numbers. She tapped the document. "This deed is clean. He can't challenge it and win. But if he ties you up in a legal dispute long enough, files enough paperwork, forces you to spend money on a lawyer, I'll run short," Silas said flatly. "And then he makes you an offer on the property," Clara said, "when you're out of options and he's holding the timing." The silence that followed was not the comfortable working silence she'd grown used to between them. This one was harder, more brittle. "How long have you known this?" she asked. "Suspected it," Silas said. "For a while." "Why didn't you—" She stopped herself. She knew why. Because there had been no one to tell. Because for 2 years he had been the one who held everything together, who absorbed every threat and every fear and every hard fact. And there had been no one on the other side of this table to say, "Tell me the real problem," and mean it. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, you go to the county clerk. You have the deed recorded formally, witnessed, filed. Make it impossible for him to claim any ambiguity in the county records." "I was going to do that," Silas said. "I know, but go early, before Hatch does." Silas looked at her. "You think he'd go tonight?" "I think a man who's been planning this for 3 years doesn't sleep in," she said. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and went to the shelf and came back with a tin of coffee, because apparently some conversations required a second round. Clara moved the deed carefully to the side while he poured, and they sat across from each other in the lamplight and worked through it, every angle, every contingency, every move Hatch might make, and what the counter to it was. Silas was not a talkative man, but he was a precise one. And once Clara had established that she was not offering opinions, but working through the problem with him, the conversation found its own rhythm and moved quickly. It was past 10 when Jake appeared in the hallway in his nightshirt. "You're both still up," he said, with the tone of someone who had been trying to sleep and finding it difficult. "Go back to bed," Silas said. "Is it about Hatch?" "Jake. I'm just asking." "Yes," Clara said, because she'd learned that Jake responded better to honesty than to redirection. "We're dealing with it. Your father has a plan." Jake looked at his father. "A good one?" Silas said nothing. "Yes," Clara said. Jake considered this. Then he looked at the two of them sitting across from each other at the table, the lamp between them, the deed to one side, the coffee cups, and something in his face registered this arrangement as something new, something that hadn't existed a week ago. He filed it somewhere. "Okay," he said. "Good night." "Good night," they both said, and Jake disappeared. Clara and Silas looked at the space where he'd been, and then at each other. The corner of Silas's mouth moved. "He doesn't miss much," Clara said. "Never has," Silas said. The county clerk's office opened at 8 o'clock. Silas was there at 7:45. Clara knew because she watched him ride out before dawn. She'd been up already, because she was always up before dawn now, because 4:30 had become as natural as breathing, whether she wanted it to or not. She tracked the time and fed the children and managed the morning with a competence that surprised even herself. And when Silas came back at mid-morning with the deed formally recorded and 2 witness signatures and the clerk's official stamp, he handed her the document, and she looked at it and felt a satisfaction so clean and solid it was almost physical. "Well done," she said. "You're the one who said go early. You're the one who went." He looked at the document. "Hatch's man was at the clerk's office when I arrived, sitting in the wagon across the road." Clara looked up. "He sent someone to watch, left when he saw me come out with the clerk." "Good," Clara said. "Let him report back." Silas looked at her. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window, and it caught the gray of his eyes. She looked at them for 1 second longer than she'd planned. "You enjoy this," he said. Not an accusation, more like someone recognizing something unexpected. "I enjoy solving problems," Clara said. "My father said it was unbecoming for a woman. My mother agreed. My sister thought it was funny." She turned back to the stove. "Turns out there are places where it's useful instead." She heard him set his hat on the table. "It's useful here," he said quietly. She kept her back to him, kept her hands busy, felt the words settle somewhere warm. "Coffee's on," she said. Hatch did not come back that day, or the next. But on the 3rd morning they found the east pasture fence down. Not wind damage, not age. Cut. 3 sections cleaned through, and 20 feet of it pulled from the posts and left in a pile that no storm had ever made. Silas stood in front of it and said nothing for a long time. Clara stood beside him. Jake stood on his other side. Even Jake said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. "How long would it take to fix?" Clara asked. "A day, maybe 2. "Can the cattle stay in the north pasture that long?" "If they don't spook," he said. Jake's head came up. "Pa, the Harmon brothers' place is north of the cattle trail. If someone ran a sound through there—" "I know," Silas said. "What does that mean?" Clara asked. Silas looked at the fence. "It means this isn't about the fence. Someone cuts the east pasture fence and then runs a noise through the north side. The cattle go straight through the gap and onto the creek property that Hatch claims is in dispute." Clara felt the cold clarity of it. "And then his men find cattle on disputed land, and he has a complaint filed at the sheriff's office by noon." "Can he do that?" Jake asked. "He can file anything he wants," Silas said. "Filing it and winning it are different things, but it costs me a lawyer." He looked at Jake. "Go back to the house. Stay with your sister." "Pa." "Jake." Jake's jaw set hard. He looked at Clara as though seeking a second opinion, or perhaps a witness to his objection. Clara gave him a level look that said, "This is not the moment." He heard it. He went. Silas moved to his horse. "I'll fix what I can today and sleep out here tonight. Make sure nothing else gets touched." "You can't fix 3 sections alone in a day," Clara said. "I can get enough up to hold them." "I'll help." He looked at her over his horse's neck. "You don't know fencing." "Then teach me." She said it simply, without challenge. "The same way you taught Jake the post. You explain it once, and I'll do it. We'll move faster." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Get your gloves." She did not have proper work gloves. She had the white traveling gloves that were already beyond saving, and a pair of wool ones that Emma had silently produced from somewhere after the first cold morning. She took the wool ones and went out and learned fencing. It was not pleasant work. The wire was exactly as indifferent to her hands as it had been to Jake's arm. There was a specific technique to tensioning it that required more upper body strength than she'd known she had, and more patience than she'd known she could access. Silas showed her once, corrected her once, and after that, let her work. She worked. They did not talk much because there was too much to do, but the silence was the good kind, the kind with purpose in it. 2 people moving through a shared task with shared focus. By mid-afternoon, they had 2 of the 3 sections repaired. By late afternoon, the sky changed. Clara felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air, a particular weight, a change in the way the cattle were moving in the north pasture, pacing the far fence, heads up, restless in a way they hadn't been an hour ago. "Silas," she said. He was already watching them. Then they heard it from the north. Not close, but not distant either. A sound she couldn't immediately identify. A crack, then another. Not thunder, not random, deliberate, repeating. "Somebody's driving them," Silas said, and his voice had gone to something very flat and very controlled. He moved immediately, and his movement had a different quality now. Not the steady, unhurried efficiency of ranch work, but something faster, sharper. The movement of a man in whose body the situation has registered as genuine danger, and who has already decided exactly what to do about it. "Get behind the fence," he said to her. "What are you, Clara? Get behind the fence and stay there. I need to know you're clear." She went, not because she was afraid, but because she heard what he was actually saying. "I can't do what I need to do if I'm worried about where you are." What happened in the next few minutes was something Clara would carry for the rest of her life. Not as something she watched, but as something that entered her and stayed. The cattle came through the north fence gap like water finding a break in a dam. Not all at once, but building. The first few moving fast, and then the mass of them behind. The sound was enormous. The ground under her feet actually transmitted the weight of it. And Silas was already moving lateral to them, his horse responding to him the way an extension of himself responds rather than a separate creature. He did something with his body and his horse and his voice. A long, sharp sound, sustained, carrying over the noise, and the shape of the herd changed. He didn't stop them, he redirected them, working the edge, keeping pace, pushing the angle of the movement 3 degrees and then 5, and then enough, the herd curving away from the creek property and back toward the south, away from Hatch's claimed territory, away from the gap in the east fence, until they were running parallel to the property line and not across it. She had seen men back home manage things, manage business, manage social situations, manage the delicate machinery of wealth and power with careful, deliberate skill. She had thought she understood what competence looked like. She had not seen anything like this. By the time it was over, the cattle were in the south pasture. Silas was walking his horse back toward her. The light was going amber and long, and Clara was standing with her back to the fence she'd helped repair, both hands flat against the post, feeling her own heartbeat very clearly. Silas swung down from his horse and looked at the cattle, then at the gap they'd come through, then at her. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice was steady. She was proud of that because her hands were not. He looked at her hands against the post. She made herself lower them. "That was deliberately done," she said. "Yes." "He'll know it didn't work." "Yes." "What does he do next?" Silas looked toward the north. His jaw was tight, his eyes calculating. "Something that leaves less to chance," he said. The something came 2 days later, and it did not come from Hatch directly. It came from town in the form of Mrs. Hildy Pierce, who ran the dry goods store and was the primary mechanism by which all information in Sagebrush Hollow moved between people. What she delivered was not a threat, but a story. The story was that Clara Ashford was not properly married to Silas Drifter. It moved through town the way those stories always do, quickly, quietly, through the medium of helpful concern. That the agency paperwork hadn't been filed, that the arrangement was improper, that those poor children were living with a woman who had no legal standing in their household, no real claim, nothing binding her to them or them to her. Clara heard it from Mrs. Pierce herself, who came to the ranch on the pretense of checking whether Clara needed anything from the store, and delivered the information with an expression that managed to be simultaneously pitying and gratified. After she left, Clara stood in the kitchen for a moment, very still. Emma was at the table behind her. She had heard everything. "Is it true?" Emma asked. It was the most words strung together in the most direct question that Emma Drifter had ever addressed to her. Clara turned around. She looked at the child, at the careful brown eyes, at the hands flat on the table, at the particular courage it took to ask a question whose answer you were genuinely afraid of. "The paperwork is a question I need to look into," Clara said honestly. "I don't know exactly what state it's in." Emma absorbed this. "But are you leaving?" she asked. The word leaving in Emma's mouth had a specific weight to it, Clara felt it down to her feet. Because Emma Drifter had said leaving before to someone she loved, and that person had not come back. And the child had spent 2 years learning to live with the shape of that absence. Clara crossed the kitchen and crouched in front of her. "No," she said, "I am not leaving." Emma looked at her for a long time. "Even if—" "No," Clara said again. "Emma, look at me." She waited until the child's eyes met hers directly. "I am not leaving this house. I am not leaving you or your brother. Whatever the paperwork says, whatever that woman or anyone else says, I am here and I intend to stay. And nothing Gerald Hatch or anyone like him does is going to change that." Emma's chin did its one small tremble. Then she pressed her lips together. Then she reached out, very slowly, and took Clara's hand. She didn't squeeze it hard. She just held it, small fingers wrapped around Clara's, light and careful, the way Emma did everything, with extraordinary precision about what she actually meant. Clara held on. She was still holding Emma's hand when she heard boots on the porch. The door opened. Silas came through. He took in the scene. Clara crouched, Emma's hand in hers, and everything about the question he'd been forming in the doorway shifted. "Someone talked to him," Clara said, standing but not letting Emma go. "The paperwork story. Hatch's idea or the town's idea of helping, I'm not sure which, but it's out." Silas's face did not move. His eyes went to Emma. Emma looked back at him with those steady, serious eyes. "She asked if I was leaving," Clara said quietly. "I told her no." Silas looked at Clara. Then he looked at her the way the morning light catches things, directly, without the filtering of distance or weariness, without the careful management of expression she'd seen him practice every day since she arrived. What was in his face was something she hadn't seen there before, something unguarded and specific and meant entirely for her. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He stopped in front of her, closer than he'd ever stood, and he said very quietly, so that only she could hear it clearly above Emma's head, "Are you?" Clara looked up at him. At the gray eyes that were not cold, she understood now, but deep, the way still water is deep. At the jaw. At the careful hands. At the man who had taught her fencing and the shelf system and hadn't flinched once when she challenged or surprised or redirected him. "I gave you my word when I stepped off that stagecoach," she said. "I don't break my word." He held her gaze. Then he exhaled one short, controlled breath and stepped back. He reached down and put his hand briefly, gently on top of Emma's head. Emma leaned into it. "I'll go see the sheriff in the morning," Silas said, "about the fencing and the herd. There are witnesses who saw the damage." "Good," Clara said. "And the paperwork question." He paused. "It's not— There's a filing the agency was supposed to complete. I don't know if they did." "We find out," Clara said. "And we handle whatever needs handling." "Together," he said. She looked at him. He was watching her with that direct, unguarded expression, still not quite gone, not quite back behind the careful distance. "Together," she said. Emma, still holding Clara's hand, made a small sound, not words. Just a sound. The kind a child makes when something that has been very tight in their chest releases slightly. Clara felt it in her own chest, like an echo. Outside, the wind had come up. It moved through the cottonwoods in that particular way it had in the evening, a sound like something big and patient breathing. The sheriff's name was Calhoun, and he was a man who wore his authority the way some men wear a coat that doesn't quite fit, aware of it slightly, uncomfortable, always adjusting. He listened to Silas in his office the next morning, with the particular expression of someone receiving information they would prefer not to have received. When Silas finished laying out the fence damage, the herd drive, the county clerk visit, and the timing of all 3 relative to Hatch's appearance on the property, Calhoun leaned back in his chair and was quiet for longer than Clara thought the situation warranted. Clara had come with Silas. She had not asked permission. He had not suggested she stay home. "You got proof it was Hatch's men on that north fence?" Calhoun asked. "I've got 3 cut sections and a herd that didn't spook themselves," Silas said. "That's not proof, Silas. That's circumstance." "Then let me tell you what else is circumstance," Clara said. Both men looked at her. She kept her voice level and her hands still in her lap. Mr. Hatch visited the property the day before the fence was cut. He made a claim about the water rights that has no legal standing. The deed is now formally recorded with the clerk's office, witnessed and stamped. The day after the fence was cut, a story appeared in town questioning the validity of my marriage to Mr. Drifter. That story serves one purpose. It destabilizes this household and makes the property more vulnerable. She paused. That's 3 moves in 4 days, Sheriff. Circumstance tends not to be that organized. Calhoun looked at her, then at Silas. She always talk like this? Frequently, Silas said. Calhoun rubbed his face. I can't arrest Gerald Hatch on circumstance, no matter how organized it is. What I can do is ride out to his place and have a conversation. Make it clear that any further incidents involving Drifter property are going to get looked at closely. That's enough, Silas said, for now. And the paperwork question, Clara said, the marriage filing. I'd like to know who started that story and on what basis. Calhoun's expression shifted. Something in it that looked like reluctant respect. I'll look into it. Can't promise more than that. Looking into it is all I'm asking, Clara said. They rode back to the ranch in the kind of silence that comes after effort. Not empty, but resting. The morning was wide and bright, and the land stretched in all directions. Clara sat beside Silas on the wagon bench and felt the particular steadiness of someone who has done what could be done and is waiting to see if it was enough. You didn't have to do that, Silas said after a while. Do what? Come in there and lay it out the way you did. Calhoun listens to reason better than he listens to grievance. You knew that. He kept his eyes on the road. My father took me to business meetings when I was young, Clara said. He said a woman who could read a room was worth 10 men who couldn't. She paused. It was the only useful thing he ever told me. He was right, Silas said. Clara looked at his profile. The jaw, the hat brim, the hands easy on the reins. You're not what I expected either, she said. He glanced at her. What did you expect? I don't know exactly. Someone harder, maybe. More closed. She thought about how to say the next part honestly. The man I almost married in New York was charming every moment of every day and meant none of it. I think I expected from a man this quiet that the inside would match the outside. That the distance was the whole of it. Silas was quiet. It isn't, she said. I know that now. He didn't answer immediately. The wagon moved. The cottonwoods along the property line came into view. Then, without looking at her, he said, Margaret, my wife. She used to say I was like a well, that you didn't know how deep it went until you'd let down some rope. He stopped, started again, slightly rougher. She was the only person who ever bothered to. The name in his mouth was something private and weighted, and Clara received it carefully, the way you receive something fragile that has been carried a long way. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, she said. She was, he said, simply, finally. The way you say things after you've already finished grieving and begun to carry differently. They rode the rest of the way without speaking. It was enough. The twist came from the direction Clara least expected, which was, as the best ones always are, from inside her own chest. The agency letter arrived that afternoon, addressed to Silas, forwarded from the county seat, official and sealed. He opened it at the table while Clara was at the stove, and Jake was outside, and Emma was reading in the corner. He read it, and his face did something she couldn't see because his back was to her. But she heard the pause in the sound of him. The stillness that replaced whatever small movements a person makes when they're simply reading. She turned around. What is it? He set the letter on the table. He didn't say anything for a moment. The agency, the filing. The original clerk who processed our arrangement left the office last month. The paperwork went to the county seat for review. He stopped. There's a question about whether the arrangement was properly witnessed on your end before you left New York. Clara came to the table. She read the letter. She read it again. It's not saying we're not married, she said carefully. It's saying they need a supplementary affidavit from me confirming I entered the arrangement voluntarily and with full knowledge of the terms. A formality. A formality that Hatch is apparently aware of, Silas said, because if it's not filed within 30 days, the arrangement is considered incomplete. Clara looked at the date on the letter. This was sent 3 weeks ago. It was delayed at the county seat. We have 9 days. 9 days. She understood in one sharp and clarifying second the complete shape of Hatch's strategy. He hadn't needed to defeat the deed. He hadn't needed to spook the cattle or cut the fence or win a single legal argument. He just needed to delay, to tie things up, create confusion, slow everything down until the clock ran out on a piece of paperwork that, if it expired, would give him exactly the vulnerability he needed. An unmarried woman living on a man's property with no legal standing was a woman a town could decide to disapprove of, and a man who couldn't protect his family's arrangement was a man whose position in the county became precarious, and a precarious man was a man who took offers. "He's been playing a longer game than we saw," Clara said. "Yes," Silas said. "Who in the county seat had access to this letter?" A pause. "Hatch has a cousin who works in the mail office," Silas said. His voice had gone to that controlled flatness again, the one she now understood as the sound of a man managing a very great deal of feeling with a very tight grip. Clara set the letter down. She pressed both palms flat on the table. She thought with the part of her mind that had gotten very good over the past several weeks at cutting through to the essential thing. What actually needs to happen right now? "I need to write an affidavit," she said. "Tonight. You need to take it to the county seat tomorrow at first light, not the local office, the county seat directly. Bypass the mail office entirely. Witness it with the county judge, not the clerk." "The county judge is 3 hours' ride," Silas said. "Then you leave before dawn," she said. He looked at her. "You'd trust the children with—" He stopped. The question finished itself. "Yes," she said. The look he gave her was not dramatic. It was not elaborate. It was simply the look of a man who has been holding everything alone for a very long time, and who has just had someone step up beside him and take hold of the other end, and who is feeling the specific and unfamiliar relief of a weight distributed between two people instead of pressing down on one. "I'll get paper," he said. They wrote the affidavit together, Silas dictating the legal language he knew from the original filing, Clara writing it out in her clear, educated hand, both of them reading each sentence aloud and confirming it before she set it down. It took 2 hours. Jake came in and understood from the room that this was not a moment for questions and made himself useful, boiling water, cutting bread, without being asked. Emma fell asleep in her chair in the corner somewhere around 9, the primer still open in her lap. When it was done, Clara signed it. She signed it with the same pen and the same hand and the same decision she'd signed the original agency letter with months ago in New York, in a parlor that felt like a different life. But this signature felt different. That one had been an escape. This one was a choice. Silas rode out before 4. He was back before noon, and he came through the door with the stamped and witnessed document in his hand and set it on the table without a word. Clara looked at the judge's seal and the date and the official notation, and something in her that had been holding tension since the previous afternoon released all at once. "Done," Silas said. "Done," she agreed. Jake, who had been watching from the hallway, released a breath loud enough to be heard across the room. "Good," he said with feeling. "Were you listening to all of this?" Clara asked him. "Most of it," Jake said without apology. "Emma was too, till she fell asleep." "I know," Clara said. Emma appeared behind her brother. She looked at the document on the table. She looked at Clara. "It's fixed?" she asked. "It's fixed," Clara said. Emma considered this. Then she went to the stove and picked up the wooden spoon and began stirring the pot that had been sitting there since morning. Because Emma Drifter's way of marking a moment was always through the next useful thing. And Clara found she loved that about her, completely and without reservation. The afternoon brought one more thing from Hatch, and it was the last. He came himself this time, not with the wagon, alone on horseback, and he did not come to the door. He stopped at the gate and called out. Silas went to meet him, and Clara stood on the porch and watched. She couldn't hear all of it, but she could hear the shape of it. Hatch's voice carrying a different quality now, less smooth, the pleasant surface thinner. She could see Silas's posture, which did not change a degree, and she watched the moment when Silas said something, 4 or 5 words, delivered flat and quiet, and Hatch's whole presentation rearranged itself. Hatch looked past Silas to the porch. He looked at Clara. She met his gaze and held it and did not move. He looked back at Silas, said one more thing, turned his horse, and rode. Silas came back to the porch. He stood at the bottom step and looked up at her. "He knows about the affidavit," he said. "His cousin reported back." "What did he say?" Silas was quiet for a moment. "He said he'd be willing to let the water rights question go, in the interest of neighborly relations." Clara looked at the road where Hatch had gone. "And the fence?" "The herd?" "He expressed regret about any incidents that may have caused concern," Silas said, with a dryness so complete she almost missed it. "Regret," she said. "That was the word. And you said?" "I said I appreciated him stopping by, and that if anything on my property was touched again, I'd be having that conversation with the county judge directly instead of the sheriff." He looked at her. "You gave me that idea." "You said it better than I would have," she said. "I doubt that," he said. They looked at each other on the porch steps in the afternoon light. It was a moment that didn't require decoration, didn't require anything added to it or taken from it. It was simply what it was. Two people who had stood in the same direction against something and had not broken. "Clara," Silas said. She waited. He came up one step. He was still below her, but closer. He looked at her with those gray eyes that she had read as cold on the first day, and now knew were the opposite of cold, deep and careful, and fully present in a way that most people's eyes never were. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "When you signed that affidavit last night," he stopped. Started again, with the careful, deliberate honesty of a man who chooses his words the way he chooses everything else, precisely because they matter. "Did you sign it because of the legal situation, or because you wanted to?" The question sat between them in the afternoon air. Clara thought about the answer with the honesty it deserved. She thought about the stagecoach and the dust and the moment she'd looked at him and felt her expectations collapse. She thought about the salt biscuits and the fence wire and Emma's hand in hers. She thought about the particular way Silas had said her name the first time, Clara, just 2 syllables, nothing elaborate. And the way it had landed somewhere it had no business landing this soon. "Both," she said. "At the start it was the legal situation. By the time I finished writing it," she met his eyes, "it was entirely because I wanted to." Silas was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Jake, who had appeared in the doorway behind Clara with the timing of a child who has decided that significant moments are exactly his business, made a small sound, and was immediately silenced by Emma appearing beside him and putting one small hand firmly over his mouth. Silas looked at his children. At the two of them in the doorway, Emma's hand over Jake's mouth, Jake's eyes wide and interested above it. Something happened in his face that Clara had not seen before. Not the fractional, almost smile she'd catalogued and come to watch for. Something fuller. Something that broke through the careful management and was simply, completely, without reservation, a real smile. Warm and sudden and entirely human. It changed his whole face. It made him look like the man he must have been before grief had laid its weather on him. And it made him look like the man he was becoming now. And Clara felt it in her chest like the opening of a door. "Jake," Silas said, "take your hand off your sister." "That's Emma's hand on my—" "Emma," Silas said. Emma removed her hand with great dignity. Jake rubbed his face. "We weren't listening," he said. "You were absolutely listening," Clara said. Jake decided this was not worth contesting. He looked at his father, then at Clara, then at his father again, with the clear-eyed assessment of a boy who has been reading rooms since before he knew that was what he was doing. "So it's settled?" he asked. "Everything? The important things?" "Yes," Silas said. "Are you going to—" Jake stopped, reconsidered. "I mean, are you—" He looked at Clara. "Are you staying for real? Not just because of the paperwork?" Clara looked at Jake Drifter, at the adventurous, wild-streaked boy with his father's jaw and his own bright, restless eyes, who had asked her on the first day whether she knew how to do anything useful and had met it entirely without cruelty, who had shown her how to read his father's silences, who had sat still at the kitchen table and let her clean a wound without asking to be comforted because he'd learned not to need it, and who deserved, she thought, to unlearn that. "Yes," she said, "for real, not because of the paperwork. Jake nodded, slow, deliberate, filing it in the important place. Then, okay, he said, and disappeared back inside with the decisive finality of someone who has gotten the answer they needed and can now return to other concerns. Emma did not disappear. Emma stayed in the doorway and looked at Clara, then at her father, then at Clara again. And then she did something she had never done before, not once in all the weeks since Clara had arrived. She crossed the porch and put both arms around Clara's waist and held on. Clara's hands came down around her immediately. She felt the small, fierce pressure of Emma's grip, nothing tentative about it, nothing careful or measured. Not the way Emma was usually careful and measured. Just a child holding on to someone she had decided was hers. Clara held on just as hard. Above Emma's head she looked at Silas. He was looking at his daughter and the woman holding her. The expression on his face was not something Clara could fully name, too many things in it at once. Grief and relief, and something that was the beginning of a kind of hope that has been put away for a long time, and is very carefully, very tentatively beginning to come back out. He reached out and put his hand on Emma's back, gently. The way he always touched his children, steady, present, saying without words the things he didn't put into language. Then he looked at Clara, and his hand was on Emma's back between them. And the distance that had been there on the stagecoach platform, all those miles of silence and weariness and careful management, was simply gone. "Thank you," he said quietly. Not to her, to the moment itself perhaps, or to whatever had brought her here, but it landed on her like a blessing. Clara looked at the two of them, the man and the child, the father and the daughter, and felt something settle deep in her bones. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We're not done." "Clara," Emma whispered against her waist, just her name, nothing else. But it was enough. Outside, the wind had died to nothing. The cottonwoods stood still. The light was going long and golden across the yard, and Clara stood on the porch of a house that was not her own, holding a child who was not her own, looking at a man who was not yet her husband in any way that mattered. And she had never been more certain of anything in her life. "Tomorrow," she said finally, "we start on the north pasture. The fence there won't hold through another storm." Silas looked at her, a long look. Then he nodded. Tomorrow. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. In the quiet that settled over them, Clara understood that the shape of what they were building was still emerging, still being written in small acts of trust and shared work and the slow, steady courage of two people deciding to keep going. But it was there. And whatever came next, whatever hatched through at them, whatever the town whispered, whatever the frontier demanded, she was not going to be the one to let it go. Not now. Not ever. The rhythm of the ranch settled into something Clara had never known, but quickly came to recognize as the pulse of real living. The days began before light and ended after dark, and in between there was work. Constant, honest, bone-tired work that left no room for the kind of worry she had carried in New York. Worry about what people thought. Worry about whether she was saying the right thing, wearing the right thing, being the right thing. Out here, the questions were simpler. Was the fence mended? Were the chickens fed? Had the water trough been cleaned? And the answers were right there in front of her, measurable and true. She learned to rise before the rooster, to move through the kitchen with purpose, to have coffee ready and biscuits that were actually edible by the time Silas came in from the barn. She learned the names of the cattle, not all of them, but the ones with markings she could recognize, the ones Jake talked about most. She learned which tools hung where in the shed and how to sharpen a blade without cutting herself, and that the best time to mend a fence was in the cool of the morning, before the sun turned the wire into something that could burn through gloves. Emma still did not speak much, but she had begun to sit closer. At meals, her chair had gradually migrated until she was directly beside Clara, close enough that their elbows touched when they ate. She never said she was doing it, she just did it. The way a plant turns toward light, without announcement, without explanation, simply following something that felt right. Jake had stopped asking whether she knew how to do useful things. He had started asking her to do them. "Clara, can you hold this? Clara, can you hand me that? Clara, come look at this." And she went. Every time. Because she understood that for a boy like Jake, being asked was the highest form of acceptance. And Silas, the man who had been a stranger to her in every meaningful way on that dusty platform, was becoming something she could read. She could tell by the set of his shoulders whether the day had gone well or poorly. She could tell by the length of his silence whether he was thinking or brooding. She could tell by the way he looked at her, that slow, measuring gaze that had once felt like judgment, whether he was weighing something she had said or something she had become. It was 3 weeks after the affidavit when the first real test came. Not from Hatch, not from the town, from the sky. The change started slowly, a heaviness in the air that pressed down like a hand, a stillness in the cottonwoods that made the leaves hang limp and silent. Clara noticed it first in the garden, where the beans had stopped growing and the squash blossoms were dropping before they could fruit. She mentioned it to Silas at supper. "Has it rained in the last month?" Silas set down his fork. 6 weeks. That's a long time. That's a drought. The word landed on the table and sat there. Jake stopped eating. Emma looked up from her plate. Even the children understood what that word meant in a place where water was not a convenience, but a necessity. "What do we do?" Clara asked. "What we can," Silas said. "We haul water to the cattle from the creek. We cut back on anything that isn't necessary. And we wait." The waiting was the hardest part. Clara had grown up in a world where problems could be solved with money or influence or the right connection. Drought was not impressed by any of those things. Drought did not care who your father was or what neighborhood you came from. It simply sat over the land and squeezed. They hauled water every morning, every evening. Clara worked alongside Silas and Jake, carrying buckets to the troughs, watching the cattle press in with desperate eyes and lowered heads. The creek that had run clear and steady when she arrived was shrinking day by day. The banks were cracking. The sound of water moving over stones had become a thinner, sadder thing. Emma took over the garden entirely. She watered each plant by hand, carrying a small bucket from the well with the same fierce, methodical focus she brought to everything. She did not complain. She did not ask for help. She simply did what needed doing, and Clara watched her and felt something between pride and heartbreak. It was on the 10th day of the drought that Jake fell. He was hauling water from the creek, had done it 100 times before, knew the path by heart, but the bank had eroded further than anyone realized. Clara heard the sound before she saw it. A crack, a splash, a sharp cry that cut through the still air like glass. She dropped the bucket she was carrying and ran. Jake was in the creek, not the deep part. The water came only to his waist, but he was on his side, his leg twisted underneath him, his face white with shock and pain. He was not crying. Of course he was not crying. But his breath was coming in short, sharp gasps that told Clara everything she needed to know. "Don't move," she said, sliding down the bank. The mud was soft and treacherous, and she went to her knees beside him, the cold water soaking through her dress instantly. "Jake, look at me. Tell me where it hurts." "My leg." His voice was thin, strained. "I stepped wrong. The bank gave way and He stopped, swallowed. "I can't stand on it." Clara looked at his leg. It was not bent the wrong way, thank God. She had seen enough accidents in her father's business to know what a broken bone looked like. But it was swelling already, the ankle thickening inside his boot. A sprain, maybe, or a break that hadn't displaced. Either way, he was not walking out of this creek on his own. "I'm going to get you out," she said. "I need you to put your arm around my shoulder." "Clara, you can't." "Jake, put your arm around my shoulder." He looked at her. His jaw was tight, his eyes bright with pain he was refusing to release. Then he did what she asked. She got him out. She did not remember exactly how, the mud, the weight, the awkward angle of carrying someone who was trying not to lean on her, but she got him out. By the time she had him on solid ground, her arms were shaking and her breath was ragged. And Jake was sitting with his leg extended, his hands gripping his own thigh, his face a careful mask of control. "Your father is going to be angry," she said. "At me?" "At himself. For not seeing the bank was eroding," she looked at him directly, "and at you, a little, for not being more careful, but mostly at himself." "How do you know that?" Because she had been watching Silas Drifter for weeks now. because she understood that the anger he carried was almost always aimed inward, at his own inability to protect the things he loved. She did not say that. She said, "Because that's how fathers are." She checked his ankle as best she could. It was swelling, but the bone felt straight. She wrapped it in strips torn from her own petticoat, the same petticoat she had worn on the stagecoach, the last piece of New York she owned, and she tied it firmly, the way she had learned from bandaging his arm. "Can you bear weight?" "No." "All right." She looked at the distance to the house, a quarter mile, maybe more. She looked at him. "I'm going to carry you." "Clara." "Jake, you cannot walk. I cannot leave you here, so I am going to carry you, and you are going to let me, and we are not going to argue about it." He did not argue. He looked at her for a long moment with those bright, restless eyes that had first assessed her on a dusty road, and something in them shifted. Not surrender, something closer to trust. She carried him. Not gracefully, she was not strong enough for that. She carried him in stages, 10 steps, then a rest, then 10 more. Her arms screamed, her back burned. The sun pressed down like a weight, and the dust rose around her feet, and she carried a boy who was not her son through a landscape that was not her home, and she did not stop. When they reached the porch, Silas was there. He must have seen them from the field. He took the porch steps in 2 strides and lifted Jake from her arms without a word, carrying him inside with the same quiet, desperate efficiency she had seen him use on everything from fence posts to wounded cattle. She followed. The rest of that day was a blur of cold compresses and whispered reassurances. Silas sent Emma to fetch the doctor from town, a 3-hour round trip on horseback, but the child went without question, without complaint, because this was what this family did. They handled what needed handling. The doctor came. He examined Jake's ankle, pronounced it a bad sprain but not a break, wrapped it properly, and delivered a list of instructions that Clara memorized before he finished speaking. Rest. Elevation. Cold cloths. No wait for at least a week. After he left, the house went quiet. Jake was asleep in his bed, his face slack with exhaustion and the last remnants of pain. Emma sat beside him, her hand on the blanket, watching his chest rise and fall with a vigilance that broke Clara's heart. Silas stood in the doorway. He was looking at his son. His hands were at his sides, and they were not still. "Clara," he said. She turned. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then, "Thank you. You said that already. I'll say it again." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he had on the porch that evening after the affidavit. "You carried him, a quarter mile, through the heat. He's not heavy. He's 80 pounds, and you carried him." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She simply stood in the hallway with the man who had been a stranger and was becoming something else, and let the silence between them say what words could not. That night, after the children were asleep, after the house had settled into its creaks and sighs, Clara sat on the porch alone. The sky was cloudless and cruel, burning with stars that offered no rain. The drought was still there. The work was still waiting. Hatch was still out there, somewhere, probably planning his next move. She should have felt afraid. She should have felt overwhelmed. Instead, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt necessary. The door opened behind her. Silas came out and sat on the step beside her. Not close enough to touch. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "Jake asked for you," he said, "before he went to sleep." "What did he say?" "He asked if you were coming back tomorrow." Clara looked at her hands. They were raw from the work, the knuckles red, the palms calloused in places she had never had calluses before. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know, that he should ask you himself." She turned to look at him. His face was half in shadow, but his eyes caught the starlight, and they were clear and steady and waiting. "I'll be here tomorrow," she said, "and the day after, and the day after that." "I know," he said, and then, so quietly she almost missed it, "I'm starting to count on it." He stood. He went back inside. The screen door clicked shut behind him, and Clara sat alone on the porch, in the dark, under the drought-stricken sky, and felt something open in her chest that she had been keeping closed for years. The drought broke on a Tuesday. Not with a gentle rain, not with the slow, gray building of clouds that she had been watching for weeks. It broke with a crack of thunder that shook the house at 3 in the morning, followed by a wall of water that sounded less like rain and more like the sky had simply opened and poured out everything it had been holding back. Clara was out of bed before she was fully awake. She ran to the children's room, found Emma already sitting up, her eyes wide and unafraid. "It's rain," Emma said, and her voice was not a question but a confirmation, as if she had been waiting for this moment and needed to name it. "It's rain," Clara agreed. They went to the window together. The yard was already turning to mud. The cottonwoods were bending, their leaves silver and wild in the downpour. And standing in the middle of it, arms outstretched, face lifted to the sky, was Jake, his bandaged ankle forgotten, his crutch discarded on the porch, his whole body turned toward the water like a prayer answered. Clara did not stop him. She stood at the window with Emma pressed against her side, and she watched a boy who had been holding his breath for 6 weeks finally exhale. By morning, the world had changed. The dust was gone. The creek was running again, dark with runoff but alive with sound. The cattle were lowing from the pasture with a different note in their voices, something closer to relief than complaint. And Clara stood in the kitchen, making coffee, feeling the air shift around her as if the land itself had taken a deep breath. Silas came in dripping. He pulled off his hat and shook water across the floor, and when he looked at her, there was something new in his eyes, something lighter. "You know what this means," he said. "The drought is over. The drought is over." He set his hat on the hook by the door. "And the north pasture will be green by the end of the week. The cattle will have grass through October." Clara smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "Good." He stood there for a moment, water still running from his hair down his face, and looked at her across the room. "Clara." "Yes?" "You saved my son." The words were plain, unadorned, but they landed in the space between them with the weight of something he had been carrying for days and had only now found the right moment to set down. "I got him out of the creek," she said. "That's all." "That's not all." He shook his head. "You carried him. You didn't hesitate. You didn't wait for me. You just did it." She did not know what to say to that, so she turned back to the stove and poured him a cup of coffee. And when she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, and neither of them pulled away. The drought was over. But something else was beginning. That afternoon, Clara found Emma in the garden. The rain had flattened the rows, and the child was on her knees, carefully lifting each plant, checking its roots, replanting it with the same deliberate precision she had always shown. Clara knelt beside her. "How bad is it?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "The beans will come back. The squash might not." "Can we replant?" "Yes." Emma looked at her. "But we need to do it today, while the ground is soft." "Then let's do it today." They worked until dusk, side by side in the wet earth, their hands black with mud. Emma directed the work with quiet gestures and the occasional single word, and Clara followed her instructions without question. By the time the light was gone, they had replanted the entire garden, every squash, every bean, every row of carrots that had been battered by the storm. Emma stood back and surveyed their work. Her face was smudged with dirt, her braid half undone, her dress soaked to the knees. She looked at Clara, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she stepped forward and put her head against Clara's shoulder. Not a hug, not quite, just a lean, a small weight, offered and received. Clara put her arm around her. "We did good work today." Emma nodded against her shoulder. "Yes," she said, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were the fullest of Clara's life. The ranch came back to life slowly, the grass greening, the creek running clear, the cattle putting on weight. Jake's ankle healed, though he limped for another week and chafed against the restriction with the impatience of a boy who had never learned to sit still. Silas worked the fields from dawn to dusk, and Clara worked beside him when she could, and when she couldn't, she worked the house and the garden and the children, with the same steady dedication. She wrote to her sister again, not the long, searching letter she had written after the affidavit, something shorter, more certain. "The drought is over. The children are well. The man I married is still quiet, but I am learning to read his silences. I think I am becoming someone I did not know I could be. I hope you would recognize me. I hope you would be proud." She did not tell her sister about the nights she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of something she could not name pressing against her ribs. She did not tell her about the way Silas looked at her sometimes, a look that was not quite hunger, not quite hope, but something in between, something that had no name because he had never let himself feel it before. She did not know what to call it either, so she let it sit. She let it grow. The way the garden grew, slowly, quietly, without demanding attention. She tended to it the way she tended to everything else, with patience and presence, and the willingness to wait for what was not yet ready to be named. The second test came on a Sunday. They did not go to church. Silas was not a church-going man, had not been since Margaret died, Clara guessed, though he never said it. But on that Sunday a wagon came up the road, and Clara recognized the driver before she recognized the horse. It was Mrs. Pierce, from the dry goods store, the woman who had delivered the gossip about the paperwork. She was not alone. Beside her sat a man in a black coat and a stiff collar, his face arranged into the careful neutrality of someone who had come to deliver an official opinion. Clara met them on the porch. She did not invite them inside. "Mrs. Pierce," she said, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" Mrs. Pierce smiled the smile of someone who was about to say something unpleasant and wanted to pretend otherwise. "Miss Ashford, this is Reverend Caldwell, from the church in Red Springs." The man nodded. "Miss Ashford, Reverend, Mrs. Pierce leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping into the register of concerned intimacy. "There have been questions, Miss Ashford, about the nature of your arrangement with Mr. Drifter. The Reverend and I thought it would be best to come and speak with you directly, rather than let the speculation continue." Clara looked at the Reverend. "Speculation about what, exactly?" The Reverend cleared his throat. "You understand that in a community like this, the appearance of propriety is important, for the children's sake, for the moral standing of the household. And we have heard that the marriage paperwork was irregular, that there is some question about whether the arrangement was properly consecrated." Clara kept her voice level. "The paperwork was filed with the county judge 3 weeks ago. It has been witnessed, stamped, and recorded. If you have further questions, I would direct you to the county seat." Mrs. Pierce's smile tightened. "The paperwork is one thing, Miss Ashford, but there is also the matter of—" She paused, selecting her words carefully. "The length of time you have been living under this roof without any formal acknowledgement from the church." Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, not anger, something closer to clarity. "Mrs. Pierce," she said, "I came to this ranch through a legal arrangement approved by a licensed agency. I have been here for nearly 2 months. In that time, I have cared for 2 children who lost their mother, helped manage a working property, and stood beside Mr. Drifter through a land dispute, a drought, and an injury to his son. If the church has questions about my moral standing, I am happy to answer them. But I would ask that you bring those questions to me directly, rather than circulating them through town." The Reverend looked at her with something that might have been respect. Mrs. Pierce looked at her with something that was not. "Miss Ashford," the Reverend said, "I did not come to accuse. I came to offer the church's support. If you and Mr. Drifter would be willing to attend services, to be seen together in the community—" "We'll consider it," Clara said. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She simply left the door open enough to be polite and closed enough to be clear. Mrs. Pierce was not finished. "And the children," she said. "They attend no school, no Sunday services. They are growing up with a father who loves them and a woman who is doing everything she can to give them stability," Clara said. "I will not apologize for that." The silence that followed was sharp and complete. Mrs. Pierce opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the Reverend. The Reverend looked at Clara. Then he nodded, a single, slow nod, and said, "I think we understand where you stand, Miss Ashford." "I hope so," she said. They left. The wagon creaked down the road, and Clara stood on the porch until it disappeared, her hands pressed flat against her sides, her heart beating hard and steady. When she turned, Silas was standing in the doorway. She did not know how long he had been there. "You heard that," she said. "Some of it. I may have been less than diplomatic." "Good," he said. She looked at him. He was not smiling. But the set of his jaw was different from the tight, controlled line she had seen on the day she arrived. It was still, settled. "Mrs. Pierce will have something to say about this," Clara said. "Mrs. Pierce always has something to say. She'll say it louder now. She'll say it to me." He stepped onto the porch, close enough that she could smell the hay and leather and sun that clung to him. "And I'll tell her the same thing you did." "And what's that?" He looked at her. The gray eyes were not cold. They had never been cold. She understood that now. "That your family," he said. He said it the way he said everything, plainly, directly, without decoration. And Clara felt the word land in her chest and take root. That night, after the children were in bed, she sat at the table with the lamp low and wrote a third letter to her sister. She wrote about the drought breaking and the garden coming back. She wrote about Jake's ankle and Emma's quiet trust. She wrote about the Reverend's visit and Mrs. Pierce's questions. And then she wrote something she had not planned to write. "I think I am falling in love with this man. Not the way I thought love would feel, not the way the novels describe it. It is slower than that, steadier. It is the feeling of standing beside someone and knowing they will not leave. It is the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone who does not waste words on things he does not mean. It is terrifying, and it is the most real thing I have ever felt." She sealed the letter before she could change her mind. In the morning she would mail it, but tonight she sat in the lamplight, in the quiet house, and let herself feel the shape of what was growing between her and the silent man in the next room. She let herself name it, just this once, in the privacy of her own heart. And then she blew out the lamp and lay down in the narrow bed that smelled of pine wood and clean air, and she listened to the Texas night. And for the first time since she had arrived, she did not wonder if she had made a mistake. She knew she had not. The morning after the Reverend's visit, Clara found a note slipped under the front door. It was written on fine paper, the kind you did not see in Sagebrush Hollow, and the handwriting was elegant and unfamiliar. She unfolded it, standing in the kitchen, the coffee still brewing, the children still asleep, and read words that made her stomach drop. "I am Margaret Drifter's sister. I have come to collect what is rightfully mine. I will be at the boarding house in town until Friday. Please, do not make this more difficult than it needs to be." It was signed with a name Clara did not recognize, Eleanor Vance. She read it twice, 3 times. Then she set it on the table and sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her hands pressed flat against the surface as if she could steady herself by holding still. Margaret had a sister. No one had mentioned it. Not Silas, not Jake, not Emma. There had been no letters, no photographs, no mention of any family beyond the grave. And now this woman had arrived, unannounced, with a claim she had not yet stated, but that Clara could already feel taking shape in the air around her. She was still sitting there when Silas came in from the barn. He saw her face before he saw the note. His step slowed. What happened? Clara slid the paper across the table toward him. He picked it up, read it, and the color drained from his face in a way she had never seen before. Not in the drought, not in the confrontation with Hatch, not in the moments after Jake's fall. This was something different. This was a wound that had never fully healed being pulled open again. He set the note down. He did not speak. "Who is she?" Clara asked. Silas pulled out the chair across from her and sat. He looked older suddenly, the lines around his eyes deeper, the weight of years settling across his shoulders like a coat he had forgotten he was wearing. "Margaret's younger sister," he said. "Eleanor. She was 17 when Margaret and I married. She didn't approve." "Of you?" "Of the marriage. Of Margaret leaving their family to come out here. Of the life Margaret chose." He paused. There was a falling out. Letters stopped. Margaret tried to reach out after the children were born, but Eleanor never responded. I assumed she had made her peace with the distance. And now she's here. Now she's here. He looked at the note again. "Collect what is rightfully mine. That means the children." Clara felt the words land in her chest like stones. Can she do that? I don't know. He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of exhaustion she had not seen him make before. She's blood. I'm their father, but she's blood. And in a court, blood sometimes counts for more than— He stopped. Then what? He looked at her. Then me. The word hung in the air between them. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that no court in the country would take children from a father who had raised them alone for 2 years, who had fed them and clothed them, and taught them to work and to grieve and to keep going. But she knew better than to make promises she could not keep. The law was not always just, and Eleanor Vance sounded like a woman who knew how to use it. What do we do? Clara asked. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. I go to town. I talk to her. I find out what she actually wants. Alone? He looked at her. Would you come? It was the first time he had asked her for anything, not told her, not accepted her offer, but asked. The question was small and simple, but it carried a weight that made her chest ache. Yes, she said, I'll come. They told the children after breakfast. Jake took the news with the same flat, controlled expression he wore for everything that hurt. Emma said nothing. She simply went to her room and closed the door. And when Clara checked on her 10 minutes later, she was sitting on her bed with her mother's photograph in her hands, staring at it without moving. Clara sat beside her. She did not speak. She simply sat, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and let the silence do what words could not. After a long time, Emma said, She never wrote to us. Your aunt? Her. Emma's voice was thin, precise. Mama used to write to her every month for years. She never wrote back, not once. Clara felt a cold anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. How do you know that? I found the letters, in Mama's trunk, all of them, tied with a ribbon. None of them had been opened. Clara looked at the photograph in Emma's hands. Margaret Drifter's face smiled up at her, frozen in time, unaware of the sister who had refused to read her words. Emma, Clara said carefully, I don't know what your aunt wants, but I know your father will not let anyone take you or your brother away, and I know that— She stopped. The words were there, waiting, but she had not said them out loud before. I know that I will not let it happen either. Emma looked at her, those deep, careful brown eyes. Then she set the photograph down and leaned into Clara's side, her small body warm and still. They stayed like that until Silas called from the front room that it was time to go. The ride to town took 40 minutes. Silas drove the wagon, his hands steady on the reins, his jaw set in that familiar line of controlled silence. Clara sat beside him, and they did not talk, but the silence was not empty. It was the silence of two people braced for the same storm. The boarding house was a narrow 2-story building on the main street, painted white with a porch that sagged in the middle. Clara recognized it from her first day in Sagebrush Hollow, when she had passed through on the stagecoach and wondered what kind of town she had landed in. She had not imagined she would be returning under circumstances like this. Silas tied the horse and stood for a moment looking at the building. Then he said, very quietly, I don't know what I'm going to say to her. You'll say what's true, Clara said. That's what you do. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's the only thing that works. He nodded. Then he went up the steps and Clara followed. The woman who opened the door was not what Clara expected. She had expected someone hard, someone cold, someone whose face would confirm every suspicion Emma's story had planted. Instead, Eleanor Vance was beautiful. She had Margaret's dark hair and Margaret's fine features, and she carried herself with the kind of effortless grace that Clara remembered from her own life in New York. The posture of someone who had never known hunger or uncertainty. She looked at Silas with an expression Clara could not read. Then she looked at Clara, and something flickered in her eyes. Silas, Eleanor said, it's been a long time. Eleanor, his voice was flat, controlled. This is Clara Ashford, my wife. Clara felt the word land in her chest like a bell. He had never said it before, not to her, not out loud. My wife. She kept her face still and extended her hand. Mrs. Vance. Eleanor took her hand briefly, her grip cool and brief. "Miss Vance," she corrected, "I never married." She stepped back, holding the door. "Come in, we have things to discuss." The parlor was small and tidy, furnished with the kind of impersonal care that boarding houses specialized in. Eleanor sat in the chair by the window, arranging her skirts with practiced precision, and looked at them as if she were the one receiving guests rather than the one who had arrived uninvited. "I'll be direct," she said. "I've come for the children." Silas did not flinch. "They're not yours to take. They're my sister's children, my blood, and from what I have heard, they have been living in conditions that are less than ideal." "From what you have heard," Clara said, her voice even, "or from what Gerald Hatch has told you?" Eleanor's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. "You know Mr. Hatch," Clara said. It was not a question. "I have spoken with him. He reached out after he learned I had been making inquiries about my sister's family." Eleanor's chin lifted. "He has been very forthcoming about the situation here." "The situation here," Silas said slowly, "is that my children are fed, clothed, and loved. They have a home. They have a school primer that their sister reads every night. They have a garden they planted themselves. They have a father who works from dawn to dusk, and a woman who is not their mother and has no legal standing to be in their lives." Eleanor's voice was sharp, precise. "I am not here to accuse you of neglect, Silas. I am here because I made a mistake. I let pride keep me from my sister for too many years, and now she is gone, and I cannot undo that. But I can make sure her children are raised properly, in a real home, with real opportunities." Clara felt the words settle into her chest with the weight of stones. She thought about Emma's hands in the garden, Jake's laugh over the salt biscuits, the way they had looked at her that morning, with trust still fragile but growing. "What opportunities do you have to offer them?" Clara asked. Eleanor turned her gaze on her. "I live in Philadelphia. I have a house on a quiet street, a good reputation, and the means to provide them with an education, a future, a place in society that this ranch will never give them." "They don't need a place in society," Clara said. "They need a place where they belong. And you think this is that place?" Clara looked at Silas. He was watching her, his gray eyes unreadable. Then she looked back at Eleanor, and she said what she had not planned to say. "I know it is." The words came out before she could stop them, and once they were out, she realized she meant them. Completely. Irrevocably. Eleanor studied her. The silence stretched. Then she stood. "I have not filed any legal papers yet," she said. "I wanted to see the situation for myself, to speak with Silas, to see the children." She paused. "I still intend to do that. I will come to the ranch tomorrow. I will meet Jake and Emma. And then I will decide what to do." "Eleanor," Silas started. "That is my offer," she said. "Take it or leave it." There was nothing else to say. Silas stood. Clara stood. They walked to the door, and Clara paused with her hand on the frame. "Miss Vance," she said, "your sister wrote to you. Every month. For years. And you never opened a single letter." Eleanor's face went still. "Emma found them," Clara said. "Tied with a ribbon. All of them." She met Eleanor's eyes. "Think about that before you decide what is best for those children." She walked out before Eleanor could respond. The ride back to the ranch was the longest 40 minutes of Clara's life. Silas said nothing, and she said nothing, but her mind was racing. She had never spoken to a stranger that way in her life, not in New York, not anywhere. She had been raised to be polite, to be gracious, to smooth over conflict with charm and carefully chosen words. She had just thrown that training out the window. She did not regret it. When they reached the house, Jake was waiting on the porch. He stood as they pulled up, his face a careful mask. "Well?" Silas climbed down. "She's coming tomorrow, to meet you." "To meet us," Jake said. "Or to take us." "To meet you." Jake's jaw tightened. "I won't go." "Jake." "I won't. She's nobody. She never wrote to Mama. She never came when Mama was sick. She doesn't get to show up now and pretend she's family." Silas looked at his son for a long moment. Then he did something Clara had never seen him do before. He put his hand on Jake's shoulder and pulled him close. Not a hug. Silas Drifter was not a man who hugged. but the kind of contact that said more than words could. "I know," he said. "I know." Jake stood rigid for a moment. Then his shoulders dropped. He leaned into his father's hand, just barely, and closed his eyes. Clara turned away to give them their privacy, and found Emma standing in the doorway. The child was watching her father and brother with an expression that was impossible to read. But when she looked at Clara, something in her face softened. "Did you tell her?" Emma asked. "About the letters?" "Yes," Clara said. Emma nodded. Then she turned and went back inside. That night, after supper, after Jake had stopped asking questions and Emma had stopped pretending to read her primer, Clara sat on the porch alone. The stars were out, bright and cold, and the air smelled of dry grass and the last traces of rain. The door opened. Silas came out and sat beside her, not close enough to touch, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool air. "Thank you," he said, "for what you said to her, about the letters. She needed to know." "Yes," he paused, "and for what you said about the children belonging here." Clara looked at her hands. "I meant it." "I know." She turned to look at him. The starlight caught the gray of his eyes, and she could see something in them that she had not seen before. Not guarded, not careful, open. "Clara," he said, "if she fights us, if she takes this to court, things could get complicated." "I know. Are you willing to stay through that?" She looked at him, at the man who had been a stranger, who had become a partner, who was becoming something she had no name for yet. She thought about the stagecoach and the dust and the letter she had held against her chest like a lifeline. She thought about the salt biscuits and the fence wire and Emma's hand in hers. She thought about the word he had said in Eleanor's parlor, "My wife." "Silas," she said, "I have been running from something my whole life. I ran from New York. I ran from a man who didn't love me. I ran from a family that didn't know what to do with me. I am done running." She met his eyes. "I am staying." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough and calloused, warm against her skin. He did not squeeze. He simply held it, the way you hold something you are afraid to break. "All right," he said. And they sat together on the porch, in the dark, under the indifferent stars, holding hands like two people who had finally stopped running and found each other standing still. Eleanor came the next morning at 9 o'clock. She arrived in a hired buggy, dressed in a gray traveling suit that was entirely wrong for the dust and heat of a working ranch. She stepped down carefully, looked at the house, the yard, the garden, the barn, with the same assessing gaze that Clara had seen in every city woman who had ever toured her father's properties. She did not look impressed. Silas met her at the gate. Clara stood on the porch with the children. Jake was straight-backed and defiant. Emma was invisible. Not literally, but in the way she could make herself seem to disappear, standing half behind Clara, her face empty and still. Eleanor walked up the path. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at the children. "Jake," she said, "you look like your mother." Jake said nothing. "And you must be Emma." Eleanor's voice softened, just slightly. "I have a photograph of your mother when she was your age. You have her eyes." Emma looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then she turned and walked back into the house. The door closed behind her. Eleanor's face flickered, loss, or perhaps something she would not name, and then settled back into composure. She looked at Silas. "She's shy," he said. "She's angry," Eleanor corrected, "and she has every right to be." She looked at the house, the yard, the garden. "Can we sit somewhere? I would like to talk, without the children." Silas led her to the porch. Clara brought a chair for her, and Eleanor sat with the careful posture of someone who did not intend to stay long. "I want to tell you something," Eleanor said, "and I want you to listen without interrupting." Silas nodded. "I was 17 when Margaret left. I did not approve. I thought she was throwing her life away, marrying a man she had known for 3 months, moving to a place I had never heard of, giving up everything our family had built. I told her she was making a mistake. She told me she was making a choice, and I let my pride turn that difference into a wall that I never tried to climb." She paused. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "I told myself she would come back. that she would realize I was right. And when she didn't, I told myself I was too proud to reach out first. And then she died. And I never got to tell her that I was wrong. She looked at Silas directly. I was wrong, Silas. She was happy here. The letters she wrote, I read a few of them, after Margaret's lawyer sent word. I didn't open them when they arrived, but I read them later. All of them. I read about the children, about the ranch, about the life she built. And I realized that I had spent 10 years being angry at a woman who had simply chosen something different from what I would have chosen. The silence that followed was deep and fragile. Clara felt it press against her ribs. I came here to take the children, Eleanor said. That was my plan. I had convinced myself that they would be better off with me, that I could give them the life Margaret should have had. But I was not prepared for... She stopped. She looked at Clara. I was not prepared for you. Clara did not know what to say. You spoke to me yesterday, Eleanor said, about the letters, and I realized that my sister's daughter knows what I did. She knows that her mother wrote to me and I did not write back. She knows that I chose pride over love, and I cannot undo that. But I can stop pretending that I have the right to take her away from the woman who already knows her. Clara felt her throat tighten. I'm not going to fight you, Eleanor said. I'm not going to file papers. I'm going to go back to Philadelphia, and I am going to write to Emma. A letter. A real one. And I am going to wait for her to decide if she wants to respond. She stood. She smoothed her skirts. She looked at Silas. You raised them well, she said, and you chose well. She glanced at Clara. Take care of them. And then she walked down the steps, across the yard, and climbed into her buggy without looking back. The buggy disappeared down the road. The dust settled. The chickens resumed their scratching, and Clara stood on the porch of a house that was not her home when she arrived, but had become one without her noticing. She did not know when she started crying. She only felt Silas's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady, and his voice, low and rough. It's all right. She's gone. But Clara was not crying because Eleanor was gone. She was crying because Eleanor had seen something she had barely let herself acknowledge, that she had already become the mother of these children in every way that mattered, and she had not even noticed it happening. That evening, Emma came to her room. She did not knock. She simply appeared in the doorway, her mother's photograph clutched against her chest, and looked at Clara with those deep, careful eyes. Is she gone? Emma asked. Yes, Clara said. She's gone. Forever? I think so. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and climbed onto Clara's bed and lay down beside her. She did not say anything. She simply pressed her back against Clara's side, the photograph still clutched to her chest, and closed her eyes. Clara lay still, feeling the small weight of the child against her, breathing slowly, letting Emma take what she needed. After a long time, Emma said, very quietly, I'm glad you're here. Clara felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been holding tight for months, years maybe, and finally letting go. Me too, she said. And they lay together in the dark, a woman and a child who had both been lost and had somehow found each other. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, and the stars burned cold and bright, and the ranch settled into its nightly quiet. But Clara did not sleep. She lay awake long after Emma's breathing had evened out, her hand resting lightly on the child's back, and she thought about the strange, winding path that had brought her here. A dead father, a broken engagement, a dusty stagecoach, a silent man, a wounded boy, a girl who had stopped speaking to the world and started speaking to her. I'm glad you're here. Those 4 words. She would carry them for the rest of her life. In the morning, she would get up, she would make coffee, she would tend the chickens and water the garden and help Jake with his chores, and Silas would come in from the barn and they would sit across from each other at the mismatched table. And it would be enough. It would be more than enough. It would be everything. The morning after Eleanor left, the house felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted that Clara had not even realized she was carrying. She made coffee and biscuits, and when Emma came to the table, the girl sat in her usual place beside Clara, but this time she reached out and took Clara's hand for just a moment before she started eating. It was quick, almost casual, but Clara felt it in her chest like a small bell ringing. Jake was quieter than usual. He ate his breakfast in silence, his eyes moving between Clara and his father, as if he was checking something he needed to confirm. Finally, he set down his fork and said, "Is she really gone?" "She's really gone," Clara said. "And she's not coming back?" "I don't think so." Jake absorbed this. Then he looked at Silas. "Pa, can I go check the north fence today, by myself?" Silas considered him. "You think you're ready?" "I'm ready." "You'll take the bay horse, not the roan, and you'll be back by noon." "Yes, sir." Jake stood and grabbed a piece of cornbread from the plate, and he was out the door before Clara could say another word. Through the window, she watched him cross the yard with the particular confidence of a boy who had just been given a responsibility he had been waiting for. "He's growing up," she said. Silas followed her gaze. "Too fast." "Or just fast enough." She turned back to the table. "He needed something to hold on to, something that was his." Silas looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I was the same way when I was his age. When everything felt uncertain, I needed something I could control. Even if it was just a small thing." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You understand them better than I thought you would." "I'm learning," Clara said. "No," he shook his head. "You're not learning. You already know." The words landed between them, and Clara did not know how to respond. So she picked up the coffee pot and refilled his cup, and they sat together in the comfortable morning silence, two people who had begun to fit into each other's rhythms. The day passed uneventfully. Jake returned from the north fence with a report that everything was sound. Emma spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds with the same fierce concentration she brought to everything. Clara washed clothes and hung them on the line, and watched the clouds build on the horizon, and thought about nothing and everything all at once. It was the kind of day that felt like a promise, the kind of day that made you believe things might work out. And then Emma got sick. It started at supper. The girl pushed her food around her plate without eating, and Clara noticed the flush on her cheeks before anyone else did. "Emma, are you feeling all right?" Emma shook her head, just once. But it was enough. Clara reached across the table and pressed the back of her hand to Emma's forehead. The heat met her skin like an open oven door. "You're burning up." Silas was on his feet immediately. He came around the table and knelt beside Emma's chair, his large hands gentle as he cupped her face. "Emma, look at me." Emma lifted her eyes. They were glassy, unfocused. She looked at her father, and then she leaned forward, and Clara caught her before she could slump off the chair. What followed was the longest night of Clara's life. They got Emma into bed, and Clara bathed her face with cool water while Silas built up the fire. Emma's fever climbed through the evening, rising into dangerous territory, and by midnight she was shivering and sweating at the same time, her small body caught in a battle Clara could only watch from the sidelines. Jake stood in the doorway. His face was white, his hands clenched at his sides. "Is she going to be all right?" "Yes," Clara said. She said it firmly because she needed to believe it, and because Jake needed someone to believe in. "She's going to be fine." "But you don't know that." "I know she's strong." Clara looked at him. "She's the strongest person in this house, and I'm not going to let anything happen to her." Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised her. He walked to the bed and took his sister's hand. He held it. He did not say anything. He just held it. The way he had been holding things together for 2 years, the way he had learned to do because there was no one else to do it. Clara watched him and felt her heart break and mend in the same breath. Silas came back with more wood. He looked at Jake holding Emma's hand, and something passed across his face that Clara could not name. He set the wood down and came to stand beside her. "The doctor?" "I sent word, but it's 3 hours each way, and the roads are bad from the rain." "Then we wait." "We wait." They waited. The hours crawled. Clara did not sleep. She sat beside Emma's bed, changing cool cloths, whispering words she hoped the girl could hear, telling her stories about a garden that would grow and a summer that would come. She told her about the chickens, about the eggs they would collect together, about the cornbread they would bake when she was well. and Emma, lost in the fever, murmured something that sounded like Clara's name. At dawn, the doctor arrived. A man named Barnes, old and stooped, with hands that had delivered half the babies in the county. He examined Emma with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen too much to be alarmed by anything. He listened to her chest, felt her pulse, lifted her eyelids and looked into the glassy depths. "Pneumonia," he said. The word landed like a stone. "Can you treat it?" Silas asked. "I can give her something for the fever, but the rest is up to her." The doctor looked at Clara. "You've been tending her?" "Yes." "Keep doing it. Cool cloths, fluids. Don't let the fever get too high. If it breaks, she'll be on the mend. If it doesn't—" He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. Clara did not need him to. The doctor left medicine and instructions. Silas walked him out, and through the window, Clara watched them speak in low voices on the porch. When Silas came back in, his face was set in that careful, controlled mask she had learned to read. "Clara," he said, "you need to rest." "I can't." "Then you need to eat." "I will." She looked at Emma. "Later." He stood behind her. She felt his presence like a warmth at her back. Then his hand landed on her shoulder, light and steady. "She's going to be all right," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you're here." His voice was rough, low. "Because you're not leaving, and she knows it." Clara closed her eyes. She leaned back just slightly and felt his hand tighten on her shoulder. They stayed like that until the sun came up. 3 days. That was how long Emma's fever held. 3 days of cool cloths and whispered prayers, and the particular terror of watching someone you love fight a battle you cannot fight for them. 3 days of Jake standing in the doorway, coming in to hold his sister's hand, leaving when he could not bear it anymore. 3 days of Silas working the ranch during the day and sitting vigil at night, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. And Clara. Clara did not leave the room. She slept in the chair beside Emma's bed, waking every time the girl stirred, checking her forehead, her breathing, her pulse. She talked to her constantly, about the garden, about the chickens, about the time she had burned the biscuits and Emma had laughed. She told her about New York, about the building so tall you had to lean your head back to see the top. She told her about the ocean, which she had seen once as a child, and which she promised to take Emma to see someday. "If you wake up," she said, "I will take you to the ocean. I will take you anywhere you want to go. But you have to wake up, Emma. You have to come back." On the 3rd night, Emma's fever broke. Clara was half asleep in the chair when she felt a small hand touch her arm. She opened her eyes. Emma was looking at her. Her eyes were clear, her face pale but peaceful, and she said, in a voice that was thin but real, "You promised me the ocean." Clara started crying. She could not help it. The tears came in a rush, and she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against Emma's, and she felt the girl's hand come up and rest on her cheek. "I remember," Clara said. "I remember everything I said." "Good," Emma whispered. "I'm holding you to it." Clara laughed through her tears. She held Emma's hand and did not let go. Silas came in. He saw Emma's eyes open, saw Clara's face wet with tears, and he stopped in the doorway. For a long moment he did not move. Then he crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside the bed. He took Emma's other hand and pressed it to his lips. "Pa," Emma said, "you look terrible." Silas laughed. It was a broken sound, raw and real, and Clara had never heard anything so beautiful. "I'm fine," he said. "I'm fine now." Emma slept after that, a real sleep, deep and restful. Clara finally let herself leave the room long enough to wash her face and change her dress. When she came back, Jake was sitting in her chair, holding Emma's hand, his head bowed. He looked up when she entered. His eyes were red. "She woke up," he said. "She did. She asked for you." "I know." Jake looked at her. "I was scared." "I know that too. I've never been that scared. Not even when Pa got thrown from his horse last year. Not even when—" He stopped. He did not say his mother's name. Clara crossed the room and knelt beside his chair. She put her hand on his arm. "Jake, you don't have to be brave all the time." "Yes, I do." "No." She looked at him directly. "You don't. You have been brave because you had to be, but you don't have to do it alone anymore." He looked at her. those bright, restless eyes. And for the first time since she had met him, they filled with tears. He did not cry. He held them, trembling on the edge. But he did not let them fall. And Clara understood that this was as close as he could come, and she honored it by not saying anything more. She simply stayed beside him, her hand on his arm, until he was ready. The recovery was slow. Emma was weak for another week, confined to bed, and Clara brought her meals and read to her from the primer and told her stories about New York that grew more elaborate with each telling. Emma listened with the same quiet attention she brought to everything, and sometimes she asked questions, small ones, careful ones, as if she was testing the ground before she stepped on it. "Were you sad when you left New York?" "Yes." "Do you ever miss it?" "Some parts. My sister. The library. The way the snow looked in Central Park." "What's Central Park?" Clara described it. The trees, the lake, the carriages, the children skating on the ice in winter. Emma listened with her eyes wide, and when Clara finished, she said, "Can we go there too? To New York? To the park, to see the snow?" Clara smiled. "I think that can be arranged." Emma nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes to sleep. Clara sat beside her and watched the even rise and fall of her chest. The pneumonia had left her thin and pale, but the color was coming back to her cheeks. The life was coming back. And Clara realized, with a certainty that settled into her bones, that she would walk through fire for this child. The evening of Emma's first day out of bed, Silas found Clara on the porch. She was sitting in the old rocking chair, watching the sunset bleed across the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cool, the first hint of autumn creeping in. He sat on the step below her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "She asked about the ocean today," Clara said. "She did?" "She wants to see it. I promised I'd take her." Silas was quiet for a moment. "You keep a lot of promises." "I try to." "I noticed." He turned to look at her, and the light caught the gray of his eyes. "I never asked you what you wanted." Clara looked at him. "What I wanted?" "When you came here. What you were hoping for. What you left behind." He paused. "I should have asked." She thought about the letter she had written to her sister, the one she had sealed and mailed and never mentioned again. She thought about the words she had put down on paper and then tried to forget. "I wanted a place where I mattered," she said. "Not because of who my family was or what I could bring to a marriage. I wanted to be needed for myself." "And are you?" She looked at him, at the man who had taught her about fence wire and shelf systems, who had trusted her with his children and his land and his carefully guarded heart. She thought about the night he had held her hand on the porch, and the way he had said, "my wife," in Eleanor's parlor, and the 3 days she had spent at Emma's bedside, never once wondering if she should be somewhere else. "Yes," she said, "I am." Silas nodded. He looked out at the sunset, and she could see the tension leave his shoulders, slow and steady, like water finding its level. "Good," he said. "I'm glad." They sat together as the light faded, and Clara felt something settle between them that had been building for weeks. Something that did not need words, did not need declarations, did not need anything except the simple, profound fact of two people choosing to stay. The next morning, the trouble started again. It began with a letter slipped under the front door while they were at breakfast. Clara found it when she went to check the mail. A single sheet of paper, folded but not sealed, with a message written in a hand she recognized from the first letter she had ever received from the agency. She read it, standing in the hallway. Then she read it again. "What is it?" Silas asked from the table. Clara walked back to the kitchen and handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read it, saw the lines deepen around his eyes, the careful stillness settle over his features like a mask. The letter was from the county land office. It informed Mr. Silas Drifter that a formal claim had been filed against a portion of his property by one Gerald Hatch, citing an updated survey that suggested the boundary line had been incorrectly recorded. A hearing had been scheduled for 2 weeks from Tuesday. Hatch had not given up. He had simply changed tactics. "When does this hearing happen?" Clara asked. 2 weeks. "Can we fight it?" "We can try." He set the letter down. But it'll cost money we don't have. How much? I don't know yet. Enough. Clara looked at the letter, at the formal language that seemed so calm and reasonable, and concealed a man's intention to take everything from this family. She thought about the drought and the fence and the pneumonia. She thought about the children who had just started to breathe easy. Then we find the money, she said. Silas looked at her. How? She did not have an answer, not yet. But she had learned something in her months on this ranch. She had learned that when you could not see the path, you kept walking anyway. You kept putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually the ground appeared beneath you. I don't know, she said, but we will. Silas held her gaze. Then he nodded. We will. And in that moment, Clara made a decision. She would not let this ranch be taken. She would not let these children lose their home. She would not let Silas Drifter lose the last thing he had left of the woman he had loved. She would fight. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, she would fight. The letter sat on the table like a live thing, its words still burning into Clara's mind even after she had read it 3 times. 2 weeks, a hearing. A man who had been circling this property for years, finally making his move in the open. She looked at Silas, who was staring at the paper as if he could will it to disappear. We need a lawyer, Clara said. We can't afford a lawyer. Then we need evidence. Something that proves the original survey was correct and Hatch's claim is fraudulent. Silas rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had come to recognize as the closest he came to showing exhaustion. I've been over those records a dozen times. They're old, but they're clear. The problem is, Hatch has money and connections. He can afford to drag this out longer than we can. Then we don't let him drag it out. Clara stood. I'm going to the county seat. He looked up at her sharply. Alone? I'll take the wagon. I'll be back before dark. Clara, it's a 6-hour round trip, and you don't know the roads. Then I'll learn them. He stood too, and for a moment they faced each other across the table, the same table where they had planned the defense against Hatch's first move, where they had written the affidavit, where they had sat through 3 days of Emma's fever. The table had become the center of their shared life, the place where decisions were made and silences were broken. I don't want you going alone, he said. I know. She softened her voice. But I need to do this. I need to feel like I'm doing something. He studied her. The gray eyes that had once seemed so cold to her were now the most familiar thing in her world. You'll take the bay horse, and you'll take my pistol. I don't know how to shoot. Then you'll carry it anyway, so that anyone who sees you will think you do. She almost smiled. That's a terrible strategy. It's the best I've got on short notice. She agreed, not because she thought she would need the pistol, but because it mattered to him. And because she understood that letting him give her something to protect herself with was a way of letting him feel less helpless. The ride to the county seat took 3 hours. The road was rutted from the recent rains, and the bay horse picked its way carefully over the muddy patches. Clara had tied the pistol to the saddle in plain view, the way Silas had shown her, and she sat straight in the wagon seat, her bonnet tied firmly against the wind. She had never traveled alone before, not like this. Not on a rough road through open country with nothing but her own judgment to guide her. In New York, she had always been accompanied by a maid, a driver, a friend, a fiancé. There had always been someone to handle the logistics, to make the decisions, to take the blame if things went wrong. Now, there was only her. And for the first time, she found that did not frighten her. She arrived at the county seat just before noon. The town was larger than Sagebrush Hollow, with a proper courthouse square and brick buildings, and Clara tied the horse outside the land office with the same deliberate calm she had seen Silas use 100 times. She smoothed her skirts, adjusted her bonnet, and walked inside. The clerk behind the counter was a thin man with spectacles and the distracted air of someone who spent his days surrounded by paper and had long ago stopped being surprised by anything. He looked up when she entered, blinked once, and said, "Help you, ma'am. I need to see the original survey for the Drifter property, Sagebrush Hollow, Section 12, Township 4. He looked at her with a flicker of interest. You related to the Drifter family? I'm Mrs. Drifter. The word came out without hesitation. She did not correct herself. She did not qualify it. She simply stood there, a woman who had come to claim what belonged to her family. The clerk nodded and disappeared into the back. Clara waited. The office smelled of dust and ink and old paper, and she could hear the ticking of a clock on the wall, marking the minutes as they passed. He returned with a large, leather-bound book, setting it on the counter with a thud. Original survey from 1853. It's all in there. Clara opened the book. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting elegant and precise. She traced the lines with her finger, following the boundaries, the creek, the landmarks that had been noted by a surveyor more than 30 years ago. Everything matched the deed she had seen. Everything was clear. Was there ever any dispute about this survey? She asked. The clerk shrugged. Not that I know of. It's been on the books since before I started working here. And the new survey that Mr. Hatch filed? Can I see that? The clerk's expression shifted. A flicker of something, nervousness perhaps. That file is currently under review. I'm not authorized to show it without permission from the county judge. I see. Clara closed the book. Can you tell me who conducted the new survey? A pause. A man named Prescott, out of Red Springs. Thank you. She slid the book back across the counter. I appreciate your time. She left the office and stood on the boardwalk, the sun warm on her face, the town bustling around her. A man named Prescott. She did not know him, but she knew what he represented. Another piece of Hatch's machinery, another cog in the system designed to take what was not his. She found the telegraph office and sent a message to her sister in New York. It was brief, expensive, and direct. Need to borrow money. Legal trouble. Will explain in letter. Love, Clara. She did not know if her sister would send it. She did not know if she had any right to ask, but she had to try. On the ride back, she thought about what she had learned. The original survey was clean. The new survey was questionable. But without seeing the new survey, she could not prove it was fraudulent. And without proof, the hearing would come down to money and influence, two things Hatch had and they did not. She arrived home as the sun was setting. The house was lit, smoke rising from the chimney, and she could see Jake out by the barn, finishing his evening chores. Emma was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth, waiting. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff, her mind still churning. Emma came to meet her. "Did you find anything?" the girl asked. "I found the original survey. It's clean. But we need more." Emma nodded. She did not ask what more meant. She simply took Clara's hand and walked with her into the house. Silas was at the table. He stood when she entered, and she saw the relief in his eyes before he hid it. "Any trouble?" "None." She sat down. "The original survey is solid, but Hatch has a new survey done by someone named Prescott. I couldn't see it." "Prescott," Silas's voice hardened. "I know him. He's done work for Hatch before. He'll say whatever Hatch pays him to say. Then we need to find proof that the survey is false, something that shows Prescott manipulated the boundary." "How do we do that?" Clara looked at him. "We find the original surveyor." Silas stared at her. "He's probably dead. That survey was done 30 years ago." "Maybe, but maybe he's not. And maybe he left records. Someone in the land office must know who he was or where his notes are." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," she said, "I'm not." He looked at her and something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "Good." That night, Clara lay awake long after the house had gone quiet. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside, the creak of the house settling, the distant sound of a coyote calling across the prairie. She thought about the hearing, about Hatch. About the money she had asked her sister for, money she had no right to expect. She thought about Silas's face when he had said the word good, the way he had looked at her, with something that was not quite hope and not quite surrender, but something in between. She did not know if they would win. She did not know if they could, but she knew she would not stop fighting. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn. She dressed in the dark, pulled on her boots, and went to the kitchen to start the coffee. The house was still, the children asleep, and she moved through the familiar motions with the efficiency of someone who had made this morning routine 100 times. Silas came in a few minutes later. He did not look surprised to see her already up. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I slept enough." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, and she could see the lines of worry etched around his eyes. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the surveyor, the original one. I want to go to Red Springs, talk to people. Find out if anyone remembers him. Red Springs is 2 days' ride." "I know. And you'd be going alone." "I know that too." He set down his cup. "Clara, I don't like you taking these risks by yourself." "I don't like taking them, but I don't see another way." She leaned forward. "Silas, I am not going to let that man take this land. I am not going to let him take your home, not after everything we've been through." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll come with you." "Who will watch the children?" "Jake can handle the ranch for 2 days. Emma can stay with the Harrisons down the road." "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm sure about you." He said it simply, without drama, and Clara felt the words settle into her chest like a warmth that spread through her entire body. "All right," she said. "We leave at sunrise." They left the next morning. Jake was given instructions with the gravity of a military commander. Feed the cattle. Check the east trough. Do not let Emma do all the work. Do not answer the door for anyone. And if Hatch or any of his men show up, take your sister and go to the Harrisons' place immediately. Jake listened with the focused attention of someone who understood the weight of what he was being asked. "I won't let you down, Pa. I know you won't." Emma stood at the gate, her hand on the fence post. She did not cry. She did not ask them to stay. She simply looked at Clara and said, "You'll come back?" "I'll come back." "Promise?" Clara knelt and looked into the girl's deep brown eyes. "I promise." Emma nodded. Then she turned and walked back to the house without looking back. The ride to Red Springs took the better part of 2 days. They camped the first night in a hollow between 2 hills. The stars spread above them like a blanket of light. Clara sat by the fire, her back against a fallen log, and watched Silas check the horses with the same methodical attention he brought to everything. "You know," she said, "when I imagined my life after New York, I did not picture sleeping on the ground in the middle of nowhere." He looked over his shoulder. "What did you picture?" "I don't know. Something easier. Something safer." He came and sat across the fire from her. "Is it harder than you thought?" "In some ways. In others," she paused. "In others, it's better." He did not respond, but she saw something move in his face, a flicker of the same warmth she had seen when he had said he was sure about her. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, and Clara felt a peace she had not known she was capable of. They reached Red Springs the next afternoon. It was a proper town, larger than Sagebrush Hollow, with a courthouse and a main street that ran for several blocks. Clara found the land office while Silas secured a room at the boarding house, a luxury they could barely afford, but necessary if they were going to be here more than a day. The clerk at the Red Springs land office was a woman. That surprised Clara. A woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pinned up under a neat bonnet, and the kind of competent hands that had been doing this work for decades. Her name was Mrs. Talmadge, and she looked at Clara with the direct, unapologetic gaze of someone who had seen too much to bother with pretense. "Original surveyor for that property?" she said. "That would have been my father." Clara felt her breath catch. "Your father?" "Hezekiah Morrow. He surveyed most of this county in the 50s and 60s. Kept meticulous records." She studied Clara. "Why are you looking for him?" Clara explained. The land dispute, the new survey, the hearing, she did not hold back. She had learned that honesty was the only currency that mattered in this part of the world. Mrs. Talmadge listened without interrupting. When Clara finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father died 10 years ago, but his records are still in the attic of my house. Every notebook, every map, every note he ever made. I never had the heart to throw them out. Could I see them?" "You can have them. I've been looking for someone to give them to. They're just gathering dust." She smiled, and for the first time Clara saw a gentleness in her face. "Come with me." The attic was dusty and hot, filled with boxes and trunks, and the accumulated debris of a long life. Mrs. Talmadge directed Clara to a stack of leather-bound notebooks in the corner, each one labeled with a year and a region. Clara found the one she needed with a hand that trembled slightly from the heat and the hope she was trying not to feel. She opened it. The handwriting was cramped but legible, the notes meticulous. Hezekiah Morrow had recorded every bearing, every landmark, every calculation with the care of a man who knew his work would outlast him. And there, on page 47, was the original survey of the Drifter property, with a note in the margin that read, "Boundary confirmed by natural landmark. Old oak at Creek Bend. No ambiguity." Clara read it 3 times, then she closed the book and pressed it against her chest. "I found it," she said. Mrs. Talmadge smiled. "I thought you might." They left Red Springs the next morning. The notebook was wrapped in oilcloth and secured in Clara's saddlebag, and she kept her hand on it for the first hour of the ride, as if it might disappear if she let go. "Clara," Silas said finally, "you found what we needed. You can stop holding it like it's going to run away." "I know," but she did not let go. They made camp that night in the same hollow, and this time Clara built the fire herself while Silas took care of the horses. She moved through the task with the confidence of someone who had learned 100 small skills without noticing, accumulating them like stones building a wall. When the fire was burning steady, she sat down and pulled out the notebook. She opened it to the page she had memorized and read the note aloud to Silas. "Boundary confirmed by natural landmark. Old oak at Creek Bend. No ambiguity." She looked up. "That's the creek Hatch is claiming. The old oak is still there. I saw it when we rode the fence line." Silas nodded slowly. "That oak has been there longer than anyone in this county. It's a landmark anyone can see. Which means Hatch's survey is wrong, deliberately wrong. It means we have a chance." She closed the notebook and held it in her lap. They sat by the fire, the stars bright overhead, the night quiet and still. And Clara felt, for the first time since the letter had arrived, that they might actually win. They reached the ranch the following evening. The house was lit, smoke rising from the chimney, and as they pulled up, Jake came running from the barn, Emma right behind him. "Pa! Clara!" Jake's voice was high with relief. "You're back!" "We're back." Silas climbed down and caught Jake in a brief, rough embrace. "Everything all right?" "Yeah, quiet. Nothing happened." Jake looked at Clara. "Did you find it?" She held up the oilcloth bundle. "We found it." Jake's face broke into a grin. Emma did not smile, but she came to Clara and leaned against her side, a gesture that had become the child's way of saying everything. They had the evidence. They had the notebook. And in 10 days, they would face Hatch in front of the county judge. But that night, they sat down to supper together. Clara had made a stew with vegetables from the garden, and the bread was fresh, and the house was warm. And for a few hours, it was easy to forget that a man was trying to take it all away. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Clara woke before dawn, her stomach tight with nerves, her hands steady. She dressed in her best dress, the dark blue wool, the one her sister had called sensible, and she pinned her hair with the same careful precision she had used for society dinners in New York. But she was not that woman anymore. She was Clara Ashford Drifter, wife of a rancher, mother of 2 children who were not her own by blood, but were hers in every way that counted. She was ready. They rode into town together, Silas, Clara, and the children. Jake had refused to stay home. Emma had simply climbed onto the wagon without anyone asking, and Silas had looked at them and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The courthouse was a brick building on the square, modest but solid. Inside, the courtroom was small, with wooden benches and a raised desk where the judge would sit. Hatch was already there, seated at a table with a man in a suit who Clara assumed was his lawyer. He looked at them when they entered, and his smile was the same as it had been on the porch that first day, pleasant, confident, and entirely empty. Clara sat down. She placed the oilcloth bundle on the table in front of her, and she waited. The judge entered, a man named Hollister, old and stern, with a face that had seen too many petty disputes to be impressed by anything. He called the hearing to order, and the proceedings began. Hatch's lawyer spoke first, laying out the claim in smooth, practiced language. The new survey, the boundary discrepancy, the need for clarification. He made it sound reasonable. He made it sound necessary. Then, it was their turn. Clara stood. She unwrapped the oilcloth and placed the notebook on the table. She opened it to the page she had marked and read the note aloud, her voice clear and steady. "Boundary confirmed by natural landmark. Old oak at Creek Bend. No ambiguity." She looked at the judge. This is the original survey of the Drifter property, conducted by Hezekiah Morrow in 1853. It is the same survey that has been on file at the County Land Office for 30 years. Mr. Hatch's new survey claims a boundary that shifts the line by half a mile, but it does not account for the oak tree. The oak tree is still there. It can be seen by anyone, and it matches the original survey exactly. The judge looked at the notebook. He called the clerk to verify the authenticity. He examined the pages, and then he looked at Hatch. "Mr. Hatch," he said, "do you have any evidence to contradict this?" Hatch's smile had thinned. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something, and Hatch's jaw tightened. "We believe the original survey may have been in error," the lawyer said. "Based on what?" "Based on the new survey conducted by Mr. Prescott." "And where is Mr. Prescott today?" A pause. "He was unable to attend." The judge looked at the notebook. He looked at the original survey. He looked at Hatch. "Then I see no reason to overturn a boundary that has stood for 30 years based on a survey whose author is not present to defend it." He banged his gavel. "Case dismissed." Clara felt the words land in her chest like a physical blow, only it was not a blow, it was a release. She sat down slowly, her legs trembling, and she felt Silas's hand close over hers under the table. Jake let out a breath that was almost a sob. Emma was very still, but her hand found Clara's other hand and held tight. They had won. They walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Hatch passed them on the steps. He did not look at them. He climbed into his wagon and drove away without a word. Clara stood on the steps of the courthouse, her husband on one side, her children on the other. The notebook was still in her hand, the evidence that had saved them. She looked at the sky, at the wide blue Texas sky that had seemed so merciless on the day she arrived, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt at home. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Silas sat on the porch. The stars were out, the air cool and clean. The victory had settled into something quieter than celebration, a deep, bone-level relief that did not need words. Silas reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. He held it the way he held everything, firmly, steadily, without hesitation. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up, for going to Red Springs, for finding that notebook," he paused, "for staying." Clara looked at their hands, intertwined in the darkness. She thought about the stagecoach, the dust, the letter she had held against her chest. She thought about the salt biscuits and the chickens and the fence wire. She thought about Emma's hand in hers, and Jake's questions, and the weight of Silas's hand on her shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He turned to look at her. In the starlight, his eyes were clear and steady, and she could see the shape of everything they had built together, the trust, the partnership, the love that had grown quietly, steadily, like a garden after rain. "Good," he said. And then slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid of breaking something fragile, he leaned in and kissed her. It was soft and brief, and full of everything he had never said. When he pulled back, Clara did not open her eyes for a long moment. She let the feelings settle into her, the way water settles into dry ground, slowly, deeply, changing everything it touched. "I love you," she said. The words came out before she planned them. But they were true. They had been true for longer than she had let herself admit. Silas was very still. Then he said, in a voice rough with emotion she had never heard from him before, "I love you too, Clara." And they sat together on the porch, hands intertwined, under the wide Texas sky, and let the night hold them. The week after the court victory settled over the ranch like the first cool breath of autumn. The land seemed to exhale. The tension that had been coiled in every fence post and every corner of the house finally releasing. Clara woke each morning with a lighter chest, the knot that had lived beneath her ribs since the letter arrived slowly loosening. She found herself noticing things she had been too busy to see before. The way the light fell across the kitchen floor in the afternoons, casting long golden rectangles that Emma liked to sit in while she read. The particular sound of Jake's boots on the porch, quick and purposeful, always moving toward the next thing. The way Silas looked at her across the table now, not with the careful, measuring gaze of the early days, but with something softer, something that had begun to resemble peace. They had not spoken again about what had happened on the porch, not directly, but the knowledge of it sat between them like a living thing, changing the shape of every silence, every glance, every accidental brush of hands when they passed each other in the kitchen. Clara carried it with her through the days, like a secret she was not ready to share, even with herself. On the third morning after the hearing, she was in the garden with Emma, pulling the last of the summer beans, when the girl spoke without looking up. "Are you going to stay?" Clara's hand stilled in the dirt. "I already told you I was." "I know." Emma kept her eyes on the plants. "But I mean, are you going to stay forever?" The question landed with the weight of everything Emma had never said out loud. Clara set down the beans and turned to face her. "Yes," she said, "forever." Emma nodded. She pulled another bean from the vine, placed it in the basket, and then, very quietly, she said something Clara had never heard her say before. "Good, because I don't want another mother. I want you." Clara felt the words hit her chest like a physical blow, not hard, but deep, the way a stone dropped into still water sends ripples outward. She did not trust herself to speak. She simply reached out and took Emma's hand, dirt and all, and held it. They finished the garden in silence. But something had shifted between them, something that did not need words. That evening, after supper, Silas found Clara on the porch. The same porch where they had sat after the hearing, after the kiss, after the words that had changed everything. She was in the rocking chair, a blanket across her lap against the evening chill, watching the stars emerge one by one. He sat on the step below her, the way he always did, not close enough to touch, but close enough. "Emma asked me today if I was staying forever," Clara said. "What did you tell her?" "The truth." She paused. "She said she didn't want another mother. She said she wanted me." Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "She's never said that about anyone, not since Margaret." "I know." He turned to look at her. The starlight caught the gray of his eyes, and she could see something in them that she had not seen before. Not relief, not gratitude, but something deeper, something that looked like hope. "Clara," he said, "I want to marry you." She felt the words settle into the air between them, solid and real. "I mean it," he continued, "not the way the agency did it, not because of paperwork or legal arrangements. I want to marry you in front of a preacher, in front of the children. I want you to be my wife the way Margaret was my wife. I want the whole town to know that you belong here." She looked at him. The man who had been a stranger on a dusty platform, who had taught her about fence wire and shelf systems, who had trusted her with his children and his land and his carefully guarded heart. The man who had kissed her on this porch and said he loved her. "I don't need a ceremony to know I belong here," she said. "I know, but I need you to know that I want to give it to you." He paused. "I want to give you everything I can." She felt the tears rise, but she did not let them fall. She reached out and took his hand, and he stood and came to her, and they stood together on the porch under the vast Texas sky. "Yes," she said, "yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her close, and she felt his arms around her, solid and warm, and she let herself rest there, in the shelter of a man who had learned to love again after loss, who had opened his heart to a woman from New York, who had arrived with nothing but a crumpled letter and the courage to start over. The next morning, Clara wrote to her sister. She wrote about the drought breaking and the garden coming back. She wrote about Emma's recovery from pneumonia and Jake's growing confidence. She wrote about the court hearing and the notebook and the victory that had felt impossible. And then she wrote about the wedding. "I am going to marry him," she wrote, "for real this time, not because of a contract or a legal arrangement, but because I love him, and because these children have become my children, and because this ranch has become my home. I know you worried about me when I left. I know you thought I was making a mistake. But I want you to know that I have never been happier. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I hope you will come to the wedding. I hope you will see the life I have built here. But even if you cannot, I want you to know that I am well. I am loved. I am home. Your sister, Clara." She sealed the letter and set it on the table to be mailed. Then she went to find Silas, because there was work to do, and a wedding to plan, and a life to keep building. The preparations were simple. They did not have money for a large celebration, and neither of them wanted one. But the community of Sagebrush Hollow surprised them. When word spread that Silas Drifter was finally marrying the woman who had been living on his ranch, properly this time, with a preacher and a ring, people began to appear at the door with offerings. A pie from Mrs. Harrison down the road, a basket of preserves from the widow Jenkins, an offer to bring flowers from Mrs. Pierce, of all people, who arrived at the house with an apology and a promise to do better. "I was wrong about you," she said to Clara, standing on the porch with her hands clasped in front of her. "I let gossip cloud my judgment. And I see now that you have been nothing but good for this family." Clara accepted the apology with grace. She had learned that holding on to anger was too heavy a burden to carry across the frontier. The wedding was set for the first Saturday of October, when the harvest would be in and the weather would be cool and clear. The Reverend from Red Springs agreed to come, the same one who had come with Mrs. Pierce months ago. But this time he came with a blessing rather than questions. Jake took the news with the kind of restrained enthusiasm that boys his age specialized in. "So you're really going to be our ma?" he asked, his voice carefully casual. "I'm going to be your stepmother," Clara said, "if that's all right with you." He considered this. "That's all right," then he added, with the blunt honesty that was so purely Jake. "You're better than the last one." "The last one?" "The agency woman, the one who left." He shrugged. "You're better." Clara smiled. "Thank you, Jake." He nodded and ran off to the barn, his boots kicking up dust. And Clara stood in the yard, watching him go, feeling the shape of the life she was building settle around her like a well-worn coat. Emma's reaction was quieter. She found Clara in the kitchen that evening, as Clara was kneading dough for the next day's bread, and stood beside the table without speaking. Clara did not push. She simply kept working, letting Emma find her own words. Finally, Emma said, "Will I call you Mama?" Clara's hand stopped. She turned to look at the girl, who was watching her with those deep, careful eyes that had first assessed her on a dusty road months ago. "You can call me whatever you want," Clara said. "Whatever feels right." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very softly, "Mama." The word landed in Clara's chest like a bell. She felt the tears rise, and she did not try to stop them. She crossed the kitchen and knelt in front of Emma and took her hands. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you can call me that." Emma leaned forward and put her arms around Clara's neck, and Clara held her, feeling the small, fierce warmth of a child who had finally found someone she could trust with the word that mattered most. The night before the wedding, Clara could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, the one that still smelled of pine wood and clean air, and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet. The children were asleep. Silas was in his room on the other side of the wall, and tomorrow she would become his wife in front of God and the community and everyone who mattered. She had thought she would be afraid. She had thought the old doubts would rise up, the voice that told her she did not belong here, that she was an imposter who would eventually be found out. But instead, she felt a calm she had never known, a deep, quiet certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. She slipped out of bed and walked to the window. The moon was full, casting silver light across the yard, the barn, the cottonwoods. She could see the garden where she and Emma had worked side by side, the fence she had helped repair, the porch where Silas had kissed her. She had arrived with nothing but a trunk and a letter. She had been scared and tired and running from a life that had left her empty. And now she stood in a home that was hers, surrounded by people who loved her, on the eve of a wedding she had chosen freely and completely. She pressed her hand against the window frame and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." She did not know who she was thanking. The frontier, the stars, the God she had stopped believing in and was beginning to find again. It did not matter. The words were enough. In the morning, she dressed in the same dark blue dress she had worn to the courthouse, the sensible one, the one her sister had called ugly. It was the best she had. Mrs. Harrison had brought a lace collar to lend her, and Emma had woven a small crown of dried flowers from the garden. Clara pinned them into her hair with trembling hands. Emma stood behind her, watching in the small mirror that hung on the wall. "You look beautiful," she said. Clara looked at her reflection. She saw a woman she had not recognized months ago, a woman whose face had been sharpened by hardship and softened by love. She saw lines around her eyes that had not been there before. She saw calluses on her hands and dirt under her nails. She saw someone who had earned her place. "Thank you, Emma," she said. Silas was waiting at the altar they had built under the cottonwoods. It was not much, a simple arch of branches that Jake had woven together, decorated with late-blooming wildflowers that Emma had gathered. The chairs were mismatched, borrowed from neighbors. The guests numbered no more than 20, but when Clara walked down the aisle, if the path between the chairs could be called an aisle, she did not see the smallness of it. She saw Silas standing at the end, his gray eyes fixed on her, his hands steady at his sides. She saw Jake standing beside him, straight-backed and proud. She saw Emma walking ahead of her, scattering flower petals with solemn concentration. She saw her family. The Reverend spoke the words that had been spoken 1,000 times before, in 1,000 churches and courthouses and front parlors across the country. But to Clara, they felt new. They felt like they were being spoken for the first time, just for her. "Silas Drifter, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Clara Ashford, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She looked at Silas, at the man who had been a stranger, who had become a partner, who had become the anchor of her new life. "I do." The Reverend smiled. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Silas leaned in. His lips met hers, soft and sure, and Clara felt the world narrow to just this moment. The sound of the cottonwoods, the warmth of the sun, the hands of her husband on her face. Emma was the first to cheer. It was a small sound, almost lost in the rustle of leaves, but it was real. And then Jake joined in, and then the neighbors, and then the applause rose around them like a wave. Clara pulled back and looked at Silas. His eyes were bright, and she saw something in them she had never seen before. A joy so complete it transformed his face into something she barely recognized. "We did it," she said. "We did it," he agreed. And they turned together to face the people who had gathered to witness their love. The celebration was modest. There was cake made by Mrs. Harrison and coffee brewed by Clara herself. There was music from a fiddle played by the old man who ran the livery stable. There were toasts and laughter, and the kind of simple joy that comes from a community that has watched two people find each other. Emma stayed close to Clara's side for most of the afternoon, not talking much, but present. Jake ran wild with the other children, his face flushed with happiness. And Silas. Silas stood with his arm around Clara's waist, not letting go, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he did. Toward evening, as the guests began to drift away, Clara found herself standing alone under the cottonwood arch. The flowers were beginning to wilt, the petals soft and brown at the edges. The chairs were empty, the fiddle had fallen silent. Silas came to stand beside her. "Tired?" he asked. "Happy," she corrected. He smiled, that real smile, the one that broke through his careful control and made him look younger, lighter. "Me too." They stood together under the arch that Jake had built, watching the sun set over the land they would spend the rest of their lives tending. "Clara," Silas said, "I want you to know something." She turned to him. "Before you came, I thought my life was over. Not in the way of dying, but in the way of stopping. I had the children and the ranch, and I was going through the motions. I didn't think there would be anything more." He paused. "And then you got off that stagecoach, and you were smaller than I pictured, and you talked back to me, and you burned the biscuits, and you carried my son through the heat, and you sat with my daughter when she was sick, and you went to Red Springs alone to find a notebook that saved our home." His voice cracked, just slightly. "You gave me back my life." Clara felt the tears rise, but she did not let them fall. She reached up and touched his face, her palm against his rough cheek. "You gave me a reason to stay," she said. "You and the children. You gave me a home." He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. They walked back to the house together, the stars emerging one by one above them. The children were already inside, Jake nearly asleep on his feet, Emma curled up in a chair with her mother's photograph in her lap. Clara looked at them, at the boy who had asked her if she knew how to do anything useful, at the girl who had taken her hand and shown her how to be still, at the man who had loved her back to life. She had come here with nothing. She had found everything. And as she closed the door on the cool October night, she knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges the frontier held, whatever storms were waiting on the horizon, she would face them with this family, in this home, under this wide and endless sky. She was Clara Drifter, and she was home. The first morning of their married life began the way all mornings on the ranch began. Dark, cold, and with the sound of boots moving through the house before dawn. Clara woke to find Silas already gone, the coffee pot warm on the stove, a note propped against the tin in handwriting that was barely legible but unmistakably his. Gone to check the east pasture. Be back by breakfast. She held the paper in her hands and read it twice, smiling at the simple domesticity of it. A note. A husband who had left her a note. She folded it carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her dress, where she would keep it for the rest of the day. The children came to the table sleepy-eyed and quiet. Jake ate his breakfast with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had chores waiting. Emma pushed her food around her plate, her eyes distant. "What is it?" Clara asked. Emma looked up. "Are things going to be different now?" Clara considered the question carefully. "Some things," she said, "but not the important ones. I'm still going to be here. Your father is still going to be your father. We're still going to do the same work and eat the same meals and sit on the same porch." Emma absorbed this. "Good," she said, and went back to her breakfast. The day passed in the familiar rhythm of ranch life, chickens and garden and fence checks and meals. But there was a new quality to it, a lightness that Clara felt in her chest as she moved through the hours. She was not a guest here anymore. She was not a temporary arrangement. She was a wife and a mother, and the words settled into her bones like heat from a fire. Silas came back at midday, tracking dust across the kitchen floor. He looked at her across the room, and something in his face softened in a way she was still learning to recognize. "Good morning," he said. "You already said that, in the note." "I'm saying it again." She crossed the kitchen and kissed him, quick and warm, and felt his hand come up to rest on her waist. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they had built. Jake made a gagging sound from the doorway. "Do I have to watch this?" "Yes," Silas said without turning. "You have to watch it. It's good for you." Emma, passing through with a basket of eggs, paused long enough to give her father a look that was equal parts disapproval and amusement. "Pa," she said, "you're being embarrassing." "That's my job." Clara laughed. It was a sound she had not made often in her life, a full, unrestrained laugh that came from somewhere deep and genuine. She covered her mouth with her hand, surprised at herself, and Silas looked at her with an expression of such pure delight that she laughed again. "You're beautiful when you laugh," he said quietly, so that only she could hear. "Don't make me cry before supper." "I'll make you cry whenever I want." He said it with the straightest face she had ever seen, and then he kissed her forehead and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there with her hand pressed to her chest and her heart beating like a drum. Autumn came fully to the ranch. The cottonwoods turned gold and then bare, their leaves gathering in drifts along the fence lines. The air grew sharp and clean, carrying the smell of wood smoke and dry grass. Clara learned to layer her clothing against the cold, to bank the fire before bed, to make stews that could simmer all day and fill the house with warmth. They settled into a routine that felt ancient and permanent. Morning chores, midday meal, afternoon work, evening together by the fire. Jake continued his education in ranch work under Silas's patient instruction. Emma continued her quiet education in the garden and the kitchen under Clara's equally patient guidance. And Clara continued her own education in the ways of this man she had married, learning to read the silences and the small gestures that spoke louder than any words. She learned that he always checked the horses one last time before bed, even if he had already checked them twice. She learned that he hummed when he was thinking, a tuneless sound that she had mistaken for the wind in the early days. She learned that he held her hand in his sleep, reaching for her in the dark, even when he was not awake. And he learned her, too. He learned that she needed time in the mornings to wake up before she could talk. He learned that she hummed too, but only when she was happy. He learned that she cried at unexpected things, a sunset, a line in a book, the way Emma's braid fell across her shoulder. They were learning each other. And the learning was a kind of love that needed no declaration. One evening in late October, a letter arrived from New York. Clara recognized her sister's handwriting on the envelope, and she carried it to the porch to read alone, her hands trembling slightly. "Dear Clara, you asked me to come to the wedding. I am sorry I could not. There were complications with William's business, and the journey seemed too long, too uncertain. But I have read your letter a dozen times. I have traced the words with my fingers and tried to imagine the life you describe. I was wrong about your leaving. I was wrong about the man you married. I was wrong about almost everything. I have spent my whole life doing what was expected of me. I married the man my parents chose. I lived in the house they approved of. I attended the parties they deemed appropriate. And I have been miserable in ways I did not allow myself to name. But you stepped onto a stagecoach and into the unknown. You chose uncertainty over comfort, possibility over safety. And you found something I have been too afraid to look for. I am proud of you, Clara. I am proud to be your sister. I cannot come to Texas, not yet. But I am enclosing a small gift, not much, just something to help with the winter. Please do not refuse it. Please let me do this one small thing to show you that I love you. Write to me about the children. Write to me about the ranch. Write to me about the stars. Your sister, Alice." Clara read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and pressed it against her chest, the way she had pressed the agency letter on that first day months ago. But this time, her hands were not trembling with fear. They were trembling with joy. Inside the envelope was a bank draft for $200. It was more money than Clara had seen in months. It was enough to buy new boots for the children, to repair the barn roof before winter, to put aside for emergencies. She went inside and handed the letter to Silas without a word. He read it, looked at the bank draft, and then looked at her. "Your sister," he said. "My sister." He nodded slowly. "She sounds like a good woman." "She's learning." He handed the letter back. "Keep it. Show the children when they're older, so they know that love can cross any distance." Clara tucked the letter into the same pocket where she kept his note from the first morning of their marriage. 2 pieces of paper, 2 declarations of love, carried close to her heart. The winter came early that year. The first snow fell in November, blanketing the ranch in a silence so complete that Clara could hear her own heartbeat. The children were delighted. Jake built a snow fort, and Emma caught snowflakes on her tongue. And for a few hours, the weight of the world lifted from their shoulders. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching them, a cup of coffee warm in her hands. Silas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "They're happy," he said. "They are. Because of you." She leaned back into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back. "Because of us." They stood together at the window, watching their children play in the snow, and Clara thought that this was what she had been looking for her whole life. Not wealth, not status. Not the approval of people who did not know her. Just this, a warm house, a loving family, a man who held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The snow melted, the winter deepened, and then, slowly, the days began to lengthen again. Spring came to the ranch like a gift. The creek swelled with runoff, the grass greened, and the garden that Emma had planted with such care began to push up through the thawed earth. Clara spent hours outside, her hands in the soil, feeling the land come back to life around her. It was on a warm afternoon in April that the final piece of their story fell into place. Clara was in the garden when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She looked up, expecting a neighbor or a delivery from town. Instead, she saw a familiar figure sitting in the driver's seat, a woman in a traveling dress, her dark hair pinned neatly under a bonnet. Eleanor Vance had returned. Clara stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands. She did not know what to feel, fear, anger, hope, but she walked to the gate and waited as Eleanor climbed down from the wagon. "Miss Ashford," Eleanor said. Then she corrected herself. "Mrs. Drifter." "Miss Vance." Clara kept her voice neutral. "I wasn't expecting you." "No, I don't suppose you were." Eleanor looked at the house, the garden, the children playing in the yard. "I came to apologize." Clara waited. "I was wrong," Eleanor said, "about you, about Silas, about everything." She took a breath. "I went back to Philadelphia after our last meeting. I told myself I had done the right thing by leaving. But I could not stop thinking about what you said, about the letters, about my sister writing to me every month and me never opening them." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle tied with a ribbon. Clara recognized it immediately. It was the letters Emma had found in Margaret's trunk. "I went to the ranch and asked Emma if I could borrow them," Eleanor said. "I told her I wanted to read them. She said yes." Her voice cracked. "I read them all, every single one, and I realized that my sister loved me. Even when I pushed her away, even when I refused to respond, she kept writing. She kept hoping." Clara felt the tears rise. She never stopped hoping. "I know." Eleanor wiped her eyes. "I came back to tell you that I am not going to try to take the children. I came to tell you that I see what you have built here. And I came to ask," she stopped. "I came to ask if I could be part of their lives. Not as a guardian, not as someone who takes them away. As an aunt, as family." Clara looked at the house. Through the window she could see Silas at the table and Emma beside him, reading from her primer. She could hear Jake's voice from the barn calling to the horses. "They are not mine to give," Clara said. "They are their own people, but I think they would like to have an aunt who loves them." Eleanor's face crumpled. She pressed her hand to her mouth, and Clara stepped forward and took her hand. "Come inside," Clara said. "Meet your niece and nephew properly." Eleanor stayed for 3 days. She helped in the garden. She read stories to Emma. She watched Jake demonstrate his writing skills with the pride of a boy showing off for an audience. She sat with Silas on the porch in the evenings, and they talked about Margaret, the things she had loved, the way she had laughed, the life she had built. On the last morning, Eleanor stood at the gate, ready to leave. Emma came to her and held out a small bundle, a leather braid, woven with flowers, just like the one she had made for Clara months ago. "For you," Emma said. "So you remember." Eleanor knelt and took the braid. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she put her arms around Emma and held her. "I will write to you," Eleanor said, "every month, like your mother did. And I will open every letter you send me." Emma nodded. "Good." Eleanor stood. She looked at Clara, and then at Silas, and then at the children. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me a second chance." She climbed into her wagon and drove away. The dust settled behind her, and the family stood together at the gate, watching her go. "Do you think she'll come back?" Jake asked. "Yes," Clara said. "I think she will." Summer came, and with it the fullness of the life they had built. The garden overflowed with vegetables. The cattle grew fat on the rich grass. The house, which had once seemed so spare and functional, began to fill with small touches. A wildflower arrangement on the table, a new cushion for the rocking chair, a shelf of books that Clara had ordered from the catalog. On a hot evening in July, they sat together on the porch after supper. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, and the air was thick with the sound of crickets. Jake was sprawled on the steps, exhausted from a day of work. Emma was curled up in Clara's lap, half asleep. Silas sat in the chair beside them, his hand resting on Clara's shoulder. "Tell me about the ocean again," Emma murmured. Clara looked at the sky. She thought about the promise she had made in the darkest days of Emma's fever, when she had not known if the girl would live to see another sunrise. "We'll go," she said. "Next summer. We'll take the train to the coast, and we'll find a beach where the water stretches to the horizon, and we'll watch the waves come in." "And you'll show me the sand?" "I'll show you everything." Emma sighed, a sound of deep contentment, and her eyes drifted closed. Silas leaned over and kissed Clara's temple. "You keep your promises," he said quietly. "I try to." "You do." He looked out at the land, their land, the land they had fought for and saved. "I never thought I would have this again." "Have what?" "A family, a home, a woman who looks at me like I matter." He paused. "I thought that part of my life was over." Clara took his hand. "It wasn't over. It was just waiting." They sat together as the light faded, two people who had found each other across the vast distance of loss and hope and the unyielding Texas land. The children slept, the stars emerged, and the ranch settled into its nightly quiet, the way it had done for generations, the way it would do for generations to come. Clara looked up at the sky, the same sky she had seen on her first night here, when she had lain awake in a narrow bed, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She had not known then what she was stepping into. She had not known that the harsh-faced man on the dusty platform would become her husband. She had not known that the silent girl and the questioning boy would become her children. She had not known that a piece of paper with a few words could become a home. But she knew it now. The frontier had asked her to be brave, and she had been. It had asked her to be patient, and she had learned. It had asked her to love without guarantee, and she had given her whole heart. And in return, it had given her everything. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Emma turned 9 in the fall, and Clara baked a cake that was only slightly lopsided. Jake caught his first wild mustang, a scrappy bay that he named Thunder after a full day of deliberation. Silas's gray eyes grew a few more lines at the corners, and Clara's hands grew a few more calluses, and the house grew a little fuller with every passing season. They wrote to Eleanor, and Eleanor wrote back. They wrote to Alice, and Alice sent packages at Christmas and on birthdays, and sometimes for no reason at all. The distances between them did not shrink, but the love did not either. On a winter evening, the second of their marriage, Clara sat by the fire with Emma's primer open on her lap. The girl was reading aloud, her voice steady and clear, her finger tracing the words as she spoke. Jake was whittling by the fire with a concentration that was almost comical in its intensity. Silas was mending a bridle at the table, his hands moving with the ease of long practice. Clara looked at them, her family, her home, her life. She thought about the woman who had stepped off that stagecoach, clutching a letter like a lifeline. She thought about how afraid that woman had been, how uncertain, how certain she was that she was making a mistake. She had been wrong. She had been so beautifully, completely wrong. "Clara," Emma said, looking up from her book, "what happens after the story ends?" Clara smiled. "What do you mean?" "In the book. The family finds their home. They work hard. They love each other. But what happens after the last page?" Clara thought about it. She looked at the fire, at the children, at her husband. She thought about all the days that would come, the work and the rest, the joy and the sorrow, the ordinary, extraordinary unfolding of a life lived with people you loved. "The story doesn't end," she said. "It just keeps going, one day at a time, one season at a time. And that's the best part." Emma considered this, then she nodded, satisfied, and went back to her reading. Clara leaned back in her chair, the fire warm on her face, the voices of her family around her. Outside, the wind moved through the bare cottonwoods, and the stars burned cold and bright over the wide Texas prairie. Inside, the kitchen smelled of bread and wood smoke and love. And Clara Drifter, who had come here with nothing but hope and a crumpled letter, was exactly where she was supposed to be. This is Clint Dawson, and you've been listening to Frontier Heart Audio. Until next time, keep your heart open and your trails safe.